Chapter 164. The situation in front of them made the three tribal heroes frown. Or not enter. This was a serious problem. The blizzards and tornadoes inside were not to be trifled with. Looking at those sharp icicles spinning non-stop, anyone would have goosebumps. Not enter. Tens of thousands of tribal elites were watching. Great Chief Blackhand had even given a death order. No matter how many people died, they had to tear this human mage into pieces. Retreat. Samuro, Kilrog, and Orgrim, who had reappeared, looked at each other. Unexpectedly, it was the Orc Sword Saint who made the first move. Abandoning the invisibility effect of Gale Step, the Orc Sword Saint jumped directly into Duque's huge ice shield that was more than 100 meters in diameter. He waved his long sword and began to spin violently. Samuro's wild eyes were filled with endless killing intent. Duque must die. Any human who dared to challenge the glory of the tribe must die. They must use the most tragic blood sacrifice to pay tribute to their compatriots who were burned to death by magic flames. The sword flashes were dazzling. The unparalleled spinning sword flashes were like a whirlwind, turning into a storm in a very short time. It was a tornado made of sword energy. The damage of the terrifying sword flashes even exceeded the reach of swords and knives, forming a sword energy that continuously cut at Duque's shield. Darniel held the flag behind Duque in shock and muttered to himself, "What skill is this?" Blade Storm, the signature skill of the Fireblade clan's Sword Saint. Duque sneered. Duque could almost close his eyes and write down the Sword Saint's combat skills. "If this is all you have, then go to hell." Yes. Duque had his eyes on Samuro. Unlike Kilrog and Orgrim, who had powerful physiques, Samuro was indeed powerful. The biggest difference was that Samuro was an assassin, while those two cockroach-like fellows were warriors. From a certain point of view, the Sword Saint was similar to a mage. They both had the strongest attack and destructive power, but their bodies were extremely weak. No, the Sword Saint was even more extreme. After increasing his speed and attack power, the Sword Saint only had mirror image as a life-saving skill. He relied on the many doppelgangers to confuse the enemy. Duque was least afraid of mirror images. With the system Elf Scan, Duque would always be able to tell which was the real body and which was the original in the shortest amount of time. Of course, Duque had a simpler and more violent method. In the next second, he abruptly raised his left hand high up. After his left hand snapped his fingers in an extremely pretentious manner, his left hand suddenly swung down to the left. This was a new move that was created by combining De Song's Freezing Hell and Ice Ring, Rapid Avalanche. With a wave of his arm, the entire area within the ice barrier, apart from Duque, Darniel, and the area 10 meters in diameter behind them, was instantly frozen. In the beginning, Sacred Swordmaster Samuro wanted to rely on his high-speed rotation to withstand the cold air. However, he immediately discovered that his rotation was becoming slower and slower, and his movements were becoming more and more sluggish. He was like a spinning top that was about to lose all its kinetic energy. Not good. For a moment, Duque almost thought that he could kill Samuro in a second. When Duque opened his right hand and made a clenching gesture, he was about to use a giant ice hand that appeared out of nowhere to grab Samuro and crush him to death. That was when Orgrim made his move. The giant square-headed hammer of destruction, came crashing down, and a crack in the lava that could be seen with the naked eye blasted through Duque's ice barrier. Coincidentally, it allowed the violent heat to enter Samuro's blade storm that was about to stop in the next second. After the high temperature was transmitted, Samuro suddenly had enough energy to resist Duque's cold air. The blade storm that had almost stopped once again displayed its shocking destructive power. The high-speed rotating blades brought with them an extremely high temperature that was enough to evaporate all the water in the surrounding air. They actually ate away at least a quarter of Duque's barrier in an instant. Duque's face darkened. I knew that hammer of destruction wasn't some blue-quality item that was sold at a roadside stall. Duque cursed. As Orgrim's famous weapon, hammer of destruction, was never a nameless weapon. After being immersed in lava all year round, Hammer of Destruction had an extremely exaggerated fire elemental energy. However, Hammer of Destruction wasn't at its peak yet. Just like Lothar's King's Sword, when a certain weapon condensed the will and faith of millions of people in an entire race. Even if that weapon itself was made of ordinary iron, it would be upgraded to at least the level of a demigod weapon. Not to mention that Hammer of Destruction itself wasn't an ordinary weapon. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that after becoming the chief of the tribe, Orgrim's strength would at least double. In the next moment Kilrogg charged over. With two short axes that were less than half a meter long in his hands, Kilrogg Deadeye immediately turned into a berserker. His axes carried some kind of strange power. Every time he swung them at high speed, they could actually reduce the frost aura in Duque's barrier at a high speed. Duque's already darkened face became even darker, not much better than the bottom of a pot. F***ck. All of the Horde's heroes are F***king perverts. I'm not going to play with you anymore. Darnu, let's go. A real B***tch should be won with the B***tch, using the B***tch to hurt people from thousands of miles away. When the three Horde heroes revealed their trump cards, Duque immediately realized that this was only part of their trump cards. It was still too early for him to kill them. That was why Duque ran away without saying a word. He grabbed Darnielle and retreated. Because they were looking up from the mountainside, the three Horde heroes were shocked to find that Duque had actually hidden a griffin not far behind him. He had no intention of fighting to the death with the Horde heroes. Duque turned around and rode on the griffin behind him. The griffin did not understand why Duque suddenly wanted to leave when he was in the middle of a good fight. However, it was well trained. After sensing the movement of its temporary master, the griffin let out a long cry of dissatisfaction and flew up. Duke Marcus, if you're still a man, come down and fight me one-on-one. Seeing that Duque wanted to run, Orgrim was almost driven mad. He could not imagine why this seemingly powerful human mage would have the idea of running away. Didn't he already suppress all three of them? Orgrim, if you're still a man, come to Storm Fort and fight me one-on-one in front of 100,000 human soldiers. A bunch of Horde heroes coming at me together and you still have the nerve to say one-on-one? The griffin climbed very quickly. In the blink of an eye, Duque had risen to a height of 30 meters. Being countered by Duque's orc language, Orgrim was speechless. Duque was right. All three of them were famous heroes in the Horde. Just as Dooku was about to escape, a mournful whistling sound came from afar and approached at high speed. Chapter 165. Bullet time was a ridiculous thing, but with the help of the system elf, Duque managed to do it. The time around him suddenly slowed down 100 times, and the thing that had almost reached the speed of sound was finally reflected in Duke's retina under the almost stagnant time. It was a strange, huge single-edged axe. The edge of the axe looked like a huge hook or an elephant's trunk. There were not many axes like this in the world of Azeroth, but they were definitely not few either. Considering that the person who threw the axe was at least 100 meters away from Duque, it was impossible for someone to throw an axe like this from 100 meters away. And from 100 meters away he was able to throw an axe in such an inhumane manner. When he threw it, it let out a terrifying shriek that could shatter one's soul, as well as a terrifying power that could split the heavens and split the earth. There was only one name for this axe: Blood Howl. An ordinary axe was obviously not worth Duque's surprise. This Blood Howl was the most important part of its owner's reputation. Grom Hellhowl. Even though Duque was a human and was destined to join the Alliance in the future, he could not help but respect this hero of the Horde. Looking in the direction where the axe was thrown with the help of the system, a burly figure was marked out by a red border. As a veteran player, Duque recognized Grom at a glance. He had braided hair, which was rare among orcs. His black hair was parted in the middle and he had a ferocious trapezoidal face. He also had a shoulder guard on his right shoulder and a belt with a skull pattern across his chest. His brown body was covered with muscles that contained an unimaginable explosive power. He even maintained the gesture of throwing the axe. Grom Hellhowl was famous because he was the first orc to be bewitched by Ghoul, Dan, and drink the blood of the Abyssal Lord Manaroth. This caused the dark brown orc's skin to turn green, and they gained the power to invade the world of Azeroth. As the chief of the Warsong tribe, one of the most powerful orc clans, Grom's strength was definitely top-notch. In the second battle of the Dark Portal in history, the axe of Grom, who was responsible for guarding the Dark Portal, was stained with the blood of human warriors. He had killed as many as 48 famous and powerful knights. His greatest achievement in history was when he sacrificed himself and cooperated with Thrall to kill the Lord of the Abyss, Manoroth, who had harmed the orcs. Duque had never imagined that Grom Hellscream, who hadn't participated in the first battle at the Dark Portal, would actually come to ambush him. History had once again reached a turning point. At this moment, Duque felt as if his spiritual sea had frozen. Seeing something didn't mean you could do it. Duque's scalp went numb. From bullet time, which had slowed down the flow of time, he saw the starting point of the axe and the ending point of the axe, his back. However, there was no way for Duque to dodge this sure kill attack. Speed up, deceleration, left and right dodging, block. In that instant, the system genie helped Duque simulate what would happen next thousands of times in his mind, but Duque couldn't escape even once. This had nothing to do with technique. This was an attack that had completely surpassed the boundaries of martial arts, physics and science. It felt as if this was the kind of attack that was guaranteed to hit, and the process of making up for the hit itself was a completely unreasonable attack that went against the laws of karma. Lothar was the king's sword that had gathered the will and faith of humans for more than 1,000 years. Grom's axe toss had also gathered all the spirit, energy and spirit of this sword saint, who was also from the Fireblade clan, as well as the wild and unparalleled will of the 100,000 warriors of the clan. The orcs will never be slaves. Grom Hellscream's classic roar seemed to echo in Duque's ears. In this spinning axe, Duque saw an illusion. He saw the struggle of the orcs on the land of Draenor for thousands of years. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. The orcs became the masters of the land of Draenor with their wild and unyielding will. Now that Draenor was heading towards destruction, the orcs saw Azeroth as the next stop for the orcs to reproduce and continue because of the collusion between Ghoul, Dan and Sardras. There was no compromise, no fluke. At this moment, Duque finally realized that even though he was a mage, sometimes he had to fight for real. Ha! Duque yelled. At this time, Darnielle, who was helping to steer the griffin, was scared out of his wits when he realized that 20 meters behind him, there was an incomparably huge axe cleaving through the air. Suddenly, 12 magic formations and 36 hands of magic appeared not far in front of the griffin's left. Darnielle's mouth was wide open in shock, and he didn't even realize that the strong wind brought by the high-speed flight was pouring into his mouth, causing his face to swell and become very funny. Multicasting and mobile casting were two special metamagic abilities that many mages couldn't train for a lifetime. Not everyone could calm down while moving at high speed, let every incantation enter the spirit sea, and use magic power to activate them in the correct order. Not to mention multicasting of mobile casting. Even if Duque cast his magic silently, it was still an inconceivable thing for mortals. It was like a person running at the speed of a 100-meter race and reciting 48 different ancient poems of more than 100 words in his mind at the same time without slowing down. Was this done by a human? But Duque did it with the help of the system elf. Not only Darnielle but Orgrim, Kilrog and Samuro, who were watching Grom Hell roar nervously from below, as well as the great chief Blackhand not far away, and thousands of orcs all witnessed this spectacle. The gorgeous formation that suddenly appeared in the sky was like a miracle depicted in epics. Arcane impact fell with a loud bang. It wasn't the messy kind of torrential rain, but a kind of strange rhythm, a very regular and accurate shot. Bang, 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 bang. In a very short time, dozens of arcane impact spells fell on the spinning axe blade, each strike less than 1/50th of a second apart. But each strike hit the same position on the left of the spinning axe blade that was constantly changing position in the air. From left to right, the arcane impact on the 12 magic formations blasted out, and the 36 hands of magic also blasted out arcane bullets. Unknowingly, the great blood roar had been led astray. Looking at the griffin descending from the clouds again, looking at Duque's iconic wizard robe on the griffin, the defenders could not help but let out deafening cheers. Well done, Earl Marcus. Kill those greenskin people. Burn, burn, burn. It's better to burn them all to death. Sir Marcus, you are our patron saint. Duque let Darnielle drive the griffin and fly slowly over the outer walls. Every time he raised his hand, a louder cheer would be aroused. Lothar flew over with a small group of griffin knights. This Azeroth Prince of Dreams had wavy black hair fluttering in the wind. Before he got close, his loud, lion-like laughter could be heard. Ah. Well done, Duque. Hey. I almost lost my life there. A few of the chiefs in the tribe probably hate me to the core. It's fine. Even if you were really trapped there, I'm sure I can bring people to rescue you. Looking at Lothar's large hemp rope with a slip knot on the griffins, but Duque rolled his eyes. Damn it, Lothar actually meant what he said. When the time comes, will you rope me like a western cowboy, hang me by the neck and pull me up? Hey. If it weren't for you, Lang wouldn't have allowed me to dispatch all the Griffin Knights. Duque suddenly felt a burst of warmth in his heart. A line of griffins flew to the inner city wall of Stormwind City, near the flight point on the east side. The griffins spread their huge wings and began to slow down. After a few flaps, their sharp claws made a sharp sound on the thick hay. Before the griffin came to a stop, Lothar had already nimbly flipped over. But there was one person faster than Lothar, Storm King Lang. How was the battle? Lang asked impatiently. It's fine, the beastmen will get lost for the time being. Are you sure? Lang's face was filled with undisguised surprise. Of course. Duque's voice rose an octave. Not only did I burn most of their tents, but I also added some seasoning to their only water source. Seasoning. Almost at the same time, the great chief of the tribe, Blackhand, could almost be renamed to Blackface. Report, the water source has been poisoned? Poisoned? How can running water be poisoned? Beside him, Kilrog angrily asked the captain of Blackhand's bodyguards. I don't know. But the water flowing down from the mountains is green. My men have personally confirmed that the beasts will die after drinking it. Someone saw Naga in the water, it should be the human Naga who poisoned it. Wasn't there a water bar blocking it? Orgrim asked. It was blown up by that human mage. It was too chaotic just now, none of us noticed. The few tribe leaders fell silent at the same time. At first, the elven forest was filled with murlocs and Naga, attacking the orc laborers who were fetching water from the river. But Orgrim came up with an idea, which was to build a crude dam to prevent the Naga and murlocs from entering the forest. After a few attempts by the Naga to bypass the dam and enter the water, they were ambushed by the orcs. Almost no Naga could be seen in the elven forest. They didn't expect to be ambushed by Duque, allowing the Naga to enter the forest. Now all the trees that could provide shade had been burned down by Duque, and the only water source had been polluted. There weren't tens of thousands of people here. If there were only a few of them, they could slowly dig deep wells. The problem was that there were 300,000 soldiers here. The orcs were very brave warriors, but they weren't undead. They needed to eat, drink, and defecate too. Without water, this was definitely a very serious problem. Blackhand was very violent, but he hadn't completely lost his mind. The word was stuck in his throat a few times before it popped out from between his teeth. Retreat. On the other side, a deafening roar came from the direction of the city gate, spreading throughout Stormwind City. Every soldier in the city raised their heads in confusion, looking at the outer city wall in confusion. Not long after, a messenger immediately shouted as he galloped on his horse. Victory! Victory! Sky Mage Earl Duke Marcus ambushed the orc camp, burning over 10,000 orcs to death. Now the orcs are retreating from the south gate. Chapter 167. The crowd involuntarily became even more restless. The black flames of the distant fire soared into the sky, and could be clearly seen even across the high city walls. Originally, no one knew that it was Duque who had set the fire, but when the messenger said so, the crowd immediately went from restless to seething. Long live Stormwind! Long live His Majesty Lang! Long live His Excellency Marcus! The people were simple and honest. Whoever could bring them a safe and happy life would be their god in heaven. Since the start of the War of the Dark Portal, the kingdom had been retreating on all fronts. The Red Ridge Mountain had fallen. Half of the Twilight Forest had fallen. Not long ago, the Elven Forest, the core area that the kingdom was most proud of, had fallen into the hands of the cruel and terrifying beastmen. The most unbearable thing was that the green-skinned devils had invaded the city yesterday. The people were in a state of panic, and they unknowingly lost their trust in the king and even the kingdom. It was at this time that the news of Duque's great victory suddenly came, like a clear spring, washing away the haze in people's hearts. This timely victory was tantamount to a cardiac stimulant, and it very well restored the confidence of the army and civilians. The retreat of the tribe, even if it was temporary, made the sword of Damocles hanging above their heads move a little. This was how people were. Even though they vaguely knew that they were still lingering near the gates of hell, as long as they did not see it with their own eyes, the threat would not be so obvious. King Duque. The hero Duque. The kingdom's new guardian Duque. Duke Marcus' reputation was spreading like wildfire in a variety of ways. In the next few days, Duque rode a griffin and set fire all over the elven forest. A dignified sky wizard became an arsonist. This was an inconceivable thing for a wizard who prided himself on being noble. There were voices of opposition, but in the face of the amazing results, such voices quickly disappeared without a trace. Firstly, Duque had the absolute support of the king. Secondly, the talents of the royal family's wizard corps had withered, and the only Morning Star wizard was only acting as the king's bodyguard. No one had the right to criticize Duque, who had appeared as the hero who had killed Sargeras. Duque's fire was effective. The term, scorching summer, was not an exaggeration. The dry forest was set ablaze almost at the slightest touch. A few fireballs in the upwind direction would turn into a forest fire that was almost impossible to extinguish. If it wasn't for Orgrim's suggestion, the beastmen would have suffered even greater losses. Duque was ruthless enough to set fire to the forest. This was something Orgrim didn't expect. The continuous fire stirred up thick smoke that covered the sky, almost turning the entire forest into a flaming hell. Except for the areas where the trees had been cut down long ago or the lakes and rivers in the elven forest, all the trees had been burned by Duque. The problem that followed almost drove the leaders of the tribe crazy. We're out of food. Orgrim was the first to speak during the tribal chieftains' meeting. Warriors of the tribe fought against 3 humans on the battlefield. It was the same for their appetite. The violent beastmen weren't like the weak humans in their eyes who could survive on bread. To maintain their burly physique, large amounts of meat were essential. The hunters of the tribe had to go deep into the forest every day to kill large numbers of animals. Unlike the old orc Draenor, there weren't many large or even gigantic creatures in the elven forest. Wild boars, gnolls, and even captured murlocs had all become food for the beastmen. Anything larger than a squirrel in the forest had been hunted down. They didn't realize it when their territory was expanding rapidly, but now that their attacks had stopped and the forest was suddenly set on fire, these fellows who were 99% muscle-brained finally realized the severity of the problem. Aren't we learning how to rear pigs? Blackhand asked in a muffled voice. Pigs don't grow up in a day. Orgrim didn't think much of Blackhand's brainlessness before, but now he felt that having a tribal chieftain like this was like riding a giant wolf rushing to hell. All the chieftains looked at Blackhand, waiting for him to make a decision. As the first tribal chieftain of the tribe, Blackhand wasn't a very smart person. Or rather, Ghoul Dan had purposely chosen Blackhand to make it easier for him to control him. Similarly, in the tribe, it was usually the bravest and most capable of fighting who became the chieftain. And the smartest ones were mostly the shamans in the tribe. But now the shaman profession was on the decline, and the warlocks that replaced it were mysterious and sneaky. Recently, all the warlocks in the Shadow Council had disappeared. Blackhand really couldn't come up with a plan if he suddenly asked him to. Unwittingly, Blackhand turned to look at his most trusted aide, Orgrim Doomhammer. At that moment, the anger in Orgrim's heart burned 1,000 times stronger. He had had enough. He had had enough of this Shadow Council chief who killed his good friend, Durotan, and his wife. He had had enough of this reckless chief who didn't care about the lives of the tribe's warriors. He had had enough of this brainless and irresponsible Blackhand. Orgrim made up his mind. After the Horde survived this crisis, he would follow the tradition of the other clans and challenge the great chief Blackhand for the position of chief, Makara. He would kill this puppet of the Shadow Council in a duel and then take care of the Shadow Council. But Duque's ruthless and effective magic attacks left a deep impression on Orgrim. Only a mystic could deal with a mystic. Should he kill Ghoul, Dan and his warlocks? For the first time Orgrim hesitated. But he had to solve the crisis in front of him first. Orgrim pointed to the north on the military map he got from the humans. We don't need so many warriors to take down this small Stormwind city. Chieftain, I suggest we split up. In this place called Iron Furnace Castle, There is another kind of weak and short humanoid creatures called dwarves. Since the tribe wants to be the master of this land, we shouldn't let any of the other powers go. Black Hand and the other tribal chieftains' eyes lit up. When they first arrived at Azeroth, the tribe was completely clueless. They didn't know where they were, how many enemies they had, or where they were. Even though Ghoul Dan emphasized the weakness of the enemies, and in reality these weak enemies were no match for them. But the tribe was still in a state of ignorance about where to attack and how many people to send. After killing a lot of humans and seizing the maps, the chieftains finally learned more information. Now, Orgrim's suggestion had undoubtedly pointed them in a brighter direction. Chapter 168. There were hundreds of thousands of horde warriors. There was no need for so many soldiers to take down this small human kingdom. Furthermore, Orgrim had already used his actions to find the enemy's weak point, the low city wall in the valley. Spreading out was also a way of survival for the beastmen since ancient times. Now that there was a shortage of food, there was no reason to gather so many soldiers here. The problem was who was going to attack the dwarves. Creatures in the natural world often had the instinct to judge the strength of their opponents based on their size. The beastmen generally looked down on the short humans who only reached the beastmen's chests. Not to mention the dwarves who only reached the beastmen's waists. To the beastmen, getting rid of those dwarves who were not even comparable to beastmen children was a matter of minutes. Thus, the beastmen chiefs saw this as a lucrative position. For a moment, every chief's eyes were filled with eagerness. If he stayed here he would receive a victory. Unfortunately, the chief Black Hand and the main force he led were here. This meant that the greatest glory and benefits would definitely belong to the Blackrock clan. The other clans could only follow behind and watch as the Blackrock clan ate the meat, while their own clans drank some of the meat soup. Going out was different. Risk? When was there no risk in survival? In our world, the beastmen called themselves Draenor. Every hunt was a fight with their lives on the line. In the eyes of the beastmen, risk was not a problem. Every chief unknowingly took a step forward. Black Hand squinted his eyes and used his limited brain capacity to think. Very quickly the chief made a decision. Kilrog, I'll give you the glory of conquering Iron Furnace Castle. I hope your Bloodring clan can bring glory to our tribe. For the tribe. Kilrog Deadeye punched himself in the chest, causing a loud bang. The old orc hero's face was blazing with excitement. Black Hand turned around and looked at Grom Inferno, who had rushed over at the last moment before the dark portal closed. He roared, "Your Warsong clan will head north and conquer this kingdom called Torrential Stronghold." Hehe. My blood howl has been hungry for a long time. Grom's lips curled up, revealing a bloodthirsty smile. Black Hand slammed the rough wooden table, instantly turning a corner into splinters. Other clans, prepare yourselves. We will directly cross the mountain and attack the eastern wall of Stormwind City. Black Hand and Orgrim's idea was a good one. Unfortunately, dreams were plentiful but reality was harsh. The Horde spent 11 days getting the orc laborers to dig wells along the way to clear the obstacles in the way of the army's advance. Once again, Orgrim and the orc army behind him were dumbfounded as they traversed the mountains with ease. Black Hand grabbed Orgrim's neck and roared, "Is this what you meant by weak defense?" The city wall was still the same 5-meter-tall wall that blocked the orcs' view, but in front of the wall, not only were there many barbicans like the one outside the main gate of Stormwind City, but there was also a 5-meter-wide moat. Not only that, but there were also many huge mounds of earth behind the city walls. The flat tops of the mounds were filled with all kinds of catapults and ballistae. Dozens of arrow towers stood tall, and the javelin throwers on them could easily cover the area beyond the moat. Those green-skinned beasts must be dumbfounded. On the arrow tower, Noxus looked at the hesitant Horde army and laughed happily. Beside him, Lang also smiled sincerely. "It's all thanks to you, Duque. If it wasn't for your idea we might have been finished." Duque shrugged. "It's nothing. The more people the easier it is. You don't have to be humble. You're my lucky star." Lang smiled. A simple city defense could not withstand the orcs' flood of attacks. Therefore, as a transmigrator, Duque used the more people the easier it is trick to deal with the orcs. It was simple. Those who were willing to dig the moat for the kingdom as long as they dug enough earth, could get an early ticket to board the ship. The people went crazy. Everyone knew that Stormwind City could not hold on for much longer. The longer they stayed, the higher the chance of death. If not for the fact that they were surrounded and the sea was the only way out, the people would have rioted and fled on a large scale. Many people at the docks thought of ways and used up all their money just to get an early ticket. Don't talk nonsense like everyone was equal. The truth was that the more capable and the more capital one had, the more likely one could escape. Didn't they see that the nobles no longer had to go through the civilian docks? They could just board the new ships of the Stormwind Navy at the military port and easily escape from this desperate Stormwind City? But now, Duque's policy gave these pessimistic people new hope. As long as they worked hard, they could save themselves and their friends in advance. The conditions were not harsh. The laborers dug under the cover of the Stormwind soldiers who were ready for battle. Digging 20 standard carriages of earth could be exchanged for a ticket. A strong worker who spared no effort to work for a day or two could basically guarantee 3 to 4 tickets on the ship. Just like that, Duke did not even need to pay. With safety as a bargaining chip, he easily added hundreds of barbicans of various sizes around the eastern and northern walls of Stormwind City. Then he built a sluice gate and connected it to the canals within Stormwind City, creating a moat on the outermost perimeter of the outer walls. Although everything looked so rough and full of flaws, it was many times better than the original 5-meter-tall city wall. Duque looked at Edwin Van Cleef, who had deep dark circles under his eyes. He did not know if he had slept for more than 10 hours. Duque smiled warmly and patted Van Cleef's shoulder. "Good job, Edwin." "Master, you flatter me." Van Cleef hurriedly lowered his head. "I'll leave the transport ship, Sea God, to you and your stonemason. Pack your things and wait for me in South Shore." Van Cleef's eyes turned red. "Master, Duque stopped Van Cleef from continuing. "It's time to fight. That's not the domain of stonemasons. You go first. The Stormwind refugees near South Shore are still waiting for you to build a house." After hesitating for half a second, Van Cleef looked up. "But I'm a man too. I can fight too." Duque snickered. "How many orcs can you fight? If you want to act cool in front of Andrew and Lothar, you should at least become a professional, right?" Van Cleef's eyes were red and filled with tears. "Go, your lovely Vanessa's waiting for you." Duque's words struck the softest part of the heart of this tragic hero who had risen up for the stonemasons. He suddenly knelt on one knee. "Thank you, master." Chapter 169. At Stormwind Port, Van Cleef's eyes reddened when he saw the huge Poseidon ship moored in the harbor. There was a large sign on the dock that read, "Exclusively used by the Stonemason Guild," and Count Duque's personal guards. Count Duke Marcus' reputation had seeped into the hearts of every citizen of Stormwind. His courage, wisdom, fairness, benevolence and greatness had almost become holy. People began to put his name alongside King Lang and Anduin Lothar. No matter where they were, the private guards of Count Marcus who wore the emblem of the 100-armed god of death would receive the most solemn treatment, equivalent to that of a knight. All the chaotic scenes would become orderly after the arrival of Duque's private guards. This was prestige, this was the people's spontaneous worship of Duque. While Van Cleef and the other stonemasons stayed behind to work, many wanted to sell their lives to Stormwind as the price for sending their families away early. Who would have thought that Duque would actually send them away? There was no way they would be killed when they were already dead. Before leaving, Makarov, the butler of Duque's external affairs, personally delivered the construction plans of the South Shore refugee camp. This made it clear to Van Cleef and his brothers that there were still many areas where they could be of use. "Here is the money needed to build the houses." Makarov's men carried over 50 chests of gold coins. "If this is not enough, you can also use your signature to withdraw up to 300,000 gold coins from the Sea King Merchant Guild branch in Kurtiras and Menethil Port." "Does he trust me that much?" Makarov smiled. "Master Marcus said that he saw your eyes and they told him that you are the kind of person who will do anything for the people, for your brothers, even sacrificing yourself. He believes in your character." 2 streams of tears flowed down his cheeks and Van Cleef wailed like a child. Makarov patted Van Cleef's shoulder. "Do well. Master said that the rebuilding of New Stormwind will depend on you." Van Cleef looked up in a daze. "Will we retake Stormwind?" "I will. Because Master himself said, Stormwind City will be destroyed, but Stormwind City is destined to be reborn. Master Duke Marcus is synonymous with miracles. If he can't do it, who can? That's right. If Duque couldn't do it, who could? At the age of 14, he declared that he had surpassed the world guardian Medivh at that time. Before the age of 15, he had become one of the richest merchants in Stormwind and even the 7 human kingdoms. In the same year, he risked his life to follow Anduin Lothar to launch a surprise attack on Karazhan, sending the boss of the Burning Legion, Sardras, into the bottomless abyss. Not long ago, he had summoned endless heavenly fire on his griffin alone, burning 100,000 orcs to death with a single fire. Well, it's necessary for publicity. Poor Darnielle was ignored, and the number of orcs killed in battle was exaggerated by 10 times. Anyway, when the orcs retreated in a hurry, Lothar asked his men to pick up thousands of charred orc corpses to show to the public, and the people decisively believed it. Who is the miracle? Duque himself was a miracle. For a moment, Van Cleef's heart was filled with blood. If you want to act cool in front of Anduin Lothar, you should at least become a professional, right? Duque's words still echoed in Van Cleef's ears. Van Cleef clenched his fists tightly and he made a decision. Become a professional. Not just a stonemason, but also a strong person to guard Master's side. Suddenly there was a commotion outside the cabin. This was a critical time. Makarov and Van Cleef immediately looked towards the direction of the sound. It was the direction of Stormwind's military port. Due to the needs of the war, the port had been constantly expanding. The northernmost berthing of the civilian port was already very close to the military port, so they could clearly see what was happening at the military port dozens of meters away. All of you get off the ship. There's no extra space on the ship for filthy people like you. Seeing the filthy people that the noble was talking about, Makarov and Van Cleef's eyes widened. Those were the Navy of Stormwind. Why were the owners of the ship being chased off? This is the Royal Navy's ship. The first mate on the ship waved his fist angrily. Not for now. The noble with the count's medal arrogantly raised his hand, and immediately a person who looked like a butler walked forward. Makarov recognized him. He was Count Christian Ferens, whom Windsor had rescued from Karazhan a while ago. Fastrasthi. He really King saved a scourgeback. And he actually treated these scum like they were his king. At this moment, Makarov was cursing Windsor in his heart for being so meddlesome. Summon the Imperial Order of King Lang Rin. From the 8th of this month, Jacob is responsible for transporting Duke Ferens and his personal belongings to South Shore. There was nothing wrong with the order itself. In fact, it was already a great gift from Lang to have the Navy ship free to transport the nobles. But the king's order was obviously amplified by someone. In order to transport more of their own people as well as their family heirlooms and valuables, the nobles actually threw the entire navy off the ship. The cabins that originally belonged to the navy were all filled with treasures, guards, servants, and maids. A navy officer suppressed his anger. Then your safety will not be guaranteed. I don't need you lousy temporary sailors. My men can handle this ship just fine. They are sailors with rich experience in long-distance voyages. The arrogance of the nobles was vividly displayed by Count Christian Ferens at this moment. Bullshit. How can a navy ship be the same as a civilian ship? The navy's lungs were about to explode. But they did not dare to do anything. The one who came out was Count Christian Ferens. But this count's father was the famous Duke Ferens. At the peak of his power, the Ferens family owned 1/5 of the Elven Forest as their territory. They were one of the oldest nobles in Stormwind. How will the ship come back? Jacob still has a mission to evacuate people from Stormwind in 5 days. Count Christian raised his chin and did not even lift his eyelids. Go to South Shore. I will order the soldiers there to bring the ship back. After saying that, he no longer paid attention to the naval officers and disappeared from the cabin, leaving only 8 fierce-looking guards lined up in a row, blocking the cabin entrance. Arrogant, condescending, and proud of being born noble. Why were there heroes like Anduin Lothar and Duke Marcus among the nobles? And why is it full of scum like Christian Ferens? Chapter 170. Although Edwin Van Cleef was young and had not yet crossed the line between youth and middle age of 30, as a steward of the Masons' Guild, his soul had suffered setbacks countless times over and over again. This was not the first time Edwin had tasted the arrogance and stinginess of the nobles. Perhaps he had spent a lot of money on a priceless stone sculpture, but refused to pay the rest because a butler said his lordship does not like it. In reality, the rest of the money was pocketed by someone, and the stonemason who had paid for the expensive materials fell into bankruptcy. When a request from the nobles came again, there was no way to refuse. Work or be persecuted to death. King Lang was wise and great. He was like the sun, giving light to the people. But there were places in the world where the sun could not shine, and the golden signboard of the nobles was the perfect prop. The nobles could wantonly exploit the people of the lower classes without paying any price. Edwin's extremely sensitive ears could still hear the voice coming from behind him. All citizens with valid tickets, listen up. Everyone is only allowed to bring no more than 10 pounds of personal belongings. Do not worry, everyone will be given enough bread and water every day from the time the ship sets sail to South Shore. In addition, the king has already prepared enough food for everyone in South Shore. Who did not have some beloved items? Limiting the amount of belongings they could bring was a helpless measure to transport more citizens. Everyone understood and understood. In this chaotic time of war, everyone was already very grateful to Duque and King Lang for such an excellent escape plan in the face of the crazy orcs. But when Edwin saw the personal belongings of the navy officers being thrown out of the hold like trash, just to accommodate the hound favored by the nobles. When he saw that only the beautiful maids who were willing to be toyed with by the nobles could board the ship, and the old maids were heartlessly abandoned, crying their hearts out on the dock, Edwin Van Cleef still clenched his fists tightly, not even noticing that his nails dug deep into his palms and bled. The nobles were almost the masters of fate. Edwin had been pushed into the abyss of despair time and time again under the unreasonable manipulation of fate. That was until he met Duke Marcus, the miracle child who rose to the top of the kingdom's hierarchy with his astonishing talent, courage, and wisdom. He saw another clean stream in the kingdom other than Anduin Lothar. Unlike Lothar, he could be of use under Duque, and unknowingly he had greater hopes for Duque. Would Duque finally grasp the power of Stormwind and sweep away the filthy aristocratic wind? He shouldn't be fantasizing, but Edwin couldn't help but wonder what would happen if Duque was in a high position. Edwin was still too young. His thoughts were practically written all over his face. Among Duque's subordinates, Makarov was never a talented fighter. However, as the leader of the mercenaries, the oldest Makarov had the most experience in dealing with people and observing their body language. Makarov saw through Edwin's thoughts in an instant. As he marveled at Duque's supernatural prophecy ability, Makarov moved his mouth close to Van Cleef's ear and spoke in a voice that only Van Cleef could hear. Master also said that fate will punish the weak, incompetent, and filthy. Edwin Van Cleef shuddered. Is Master Marcus hinting at something? He turned his head abruptly. Makarov, the old but shrewd count, had a "I didn't say anything" look on his face. Edwin suddenly had a feeling that Duque had prepared some sort of backup plan. Was he going to wipe out all the filthy and despicable nobles? What was he going to do? Was he going to act under the king's nose when the orcs were invading? After all, no matter how wise and great Clayan was, he had never touched the interests of these nobles, let alone punished them. Everything Lang did was to improve the lives of the people outside of the traditional circle of interests of the nobles. But Master Duque, Edwin's mind was a mess. He knew that he was the backbone of Duque's faction and Makarov was Duque's mouthpiece. There was no need for Makarov to lie to him. Did Duque see through his thoughts and want his complete loyalty? What kind of joke is this? What value do I have that the great Sea King would place so much importance on me? Van Cleef's head was about to explode. The only thing he knew was that if anything happened to these nobles during this escape, it would definitely have something to do with Duque. After sharing a shocking secret, the thrill of entering the core of Duque's power was like a strong wine being poured into his veins, giving Edwin a sense of excitement. Perhaps Duke Marcus really was the hero in his heart who could lead the people onto the path of greatness. Time passed quickly and 2 hours later the preparations for departure were finally completed. In fact, Van Cleef's ship was the first to set sail. A transport ship modified from a civilian merchant ship could not compare to a real warship in terms of speed or direction. Less than half an hour into the voyage, Van Cleef saw the warships loaded with nobles and expensive valuables easily overtake their transport ships, disappearing into the horizon in the short span of an hour. Van Cleef sneered as he watched the warships that had removed all the naval flags of Stormwind, leaving only the lion flag in place of the noble family's insignia. Night fell. The curtain of night receded, but danger was approaching the nobles in the early morning. After the morning mist dissipated, the blood sails that blotted out the sun could be seen in the distance. The private sailor in charge of the lookout was indescribably shocked. He couldn't react in time and was stunned for a few seconds before he rang the alarm. Clang, clang, clang. Not good. Not good. It's the Bloodsail Pirates. The Bloodsail Pirates were a group of pirates formed by the rebel army led by Duke Varel. Their headquarters were in Stranglethorn Vale. As a group of pirates that used to be part of the Navy, the Bloodsail Pirates were extremely powerful. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if the nobles left the Navy behind, they might not be able to fight against the Bloodsail Pirates, not to mention that they had courted death by chasing all the Navy off the ship. Fear and uneasiness swept through the entire fleet like a freezing wind in a very short time. Countless nobles were awakened from their dreams by the alarm bell, and everyone's eyes were hazy. But after hearing the name of the Bloodsail Pirates, everyone's sleepiness was blown away. Impossible. This was the first reaction of all the nobles. Once they put on their clothes with the help of their maids and stepped out of the cabin onto the deck, their expressions froze in fear. Chapter 171. Impossible? This was the first reaction of the nobles. Oh no. This was their next thought. The long period of peace at sea had numbed them. They had even forgotten that there was such a thing as pirates. There were no pirates in Stormwind before because they were too poor. There were not many ships that occasionally arrived at Stormwind City. That kind of wealth could not attract large-scale pirates. What else was left in Stormwind City? What could a dozen fishing boats, which were not much bigger than a sampan, bring? As for Sea King Duque's Pearl Fleet, it was escorted by Naga. It was like a hedgehog and anyone who touched it would be stabbed. It was different now. Most of the nobles who fled from the Elven Forest to Stormwind City brought with them the wealth that their families had accumulated for thousands of years. In order to carry as much treasure as possible on the limited cabins, the brainless nobles even subconsciously ignored the existence of danger, and even the original navy on the ship were thrown off the ship. In order to escape from Stormwind City as soon as possible, they did not even wait for the slow civilian transport ships. Otherwise they could at least use them as bait to delay the Bloodsail Pirates. If this was on land, the nobles could more or less resist with their strong guards. Unfortunately, this was the sea. In all fairness, it was a miracle that most people who could not swim could exert 70% of their strength on a ship that was constantly shaking. Not to mention, the private sailors of the nobles were at most goods that ran merchant ships. This was really courting death. They could have courted death anywhere, but they just had to court death in a domain that they were unfamiliar with. Turn around and run. We'll be safe once we get back to the fleet. There are warships of Cultivation there. Duke Agath Ferens, who had rushed over after hearing the news, grabbed the captain's collar, his eyes bloodshot. Yes. Anyone could die. The noble bloodline could not be severed on this damned sea. There were also warships of Cultivation helping the fleet. Although those warships were also full of civilians, the warships were operated by the strong soldiers of the Kingdom of Sea. If they had to die, they could die by the Cultivation. It's too late, the captain cried. We're carrying too much weight. We're already overloaded, we can't run fast. Turn around and run. Throw away the things. Throw away the heaviest gold. Only by staying alive could the clan continue. What's the use of gold if I'm dead? The old duke's silver hair and beard danced wildly in the wind, his crimson eyes showing a rare sense of rationality amidst the fear. As the sails changed direction, more than 10 huge Stormwind warships began to draw huge arcs of white waves on the surface of the sea. Unfortunately, because there was no unified command, some of them had full rudders on the left, while others had full rudders on the right. The direct result was that the two ships almost collided head-on. Both sides were flustered and managed to avoid the worst situation of the bow collision at the last moment. Even so, the collision of the sides and the decorations on the sides of the two ships that brushed past each other scared the wits out of them. For a time the scene was extremely chaotic. Trash. In the distant flagship of the Bloodsail Pirates, A voice rang out. Brigadier General Lester Zank flashed a contemptuous smile, but when he saw the nobles starting to let their men drop a large number of heavy boxes to lighten the ship's load, he had a bad feeling. When he saw the golden light emitting from a box that disintegrated in mid-air, his bad premonition was confirmed. Lester could not help but curse. Gold. It's all King gold. You bunch of noble scum think you can run away just by throwing away the weights? Idiot, I don't want the ransom. I'll spend 3 days and 3 nights roasting the guy who came up with this rotten idea into charcoal. Lester almost fell into madness from anger. This was the King deep sea. Precious metals thrown into the sea could only sink to unreachable depths or become food for the fishes. How am I supposed to fish them out? Fire. Fire the bow cannon. Lester yelled at the top of his lungs. The first mate was dumbfounded. Brigadier General Zank, we haven't entered the effective firing range yet. We just used the bow cannon. Idiot, do you still expect that bunch of lousy land nobles to fight us in a gorgeous naval battle like Cultivation? I'm going to destroy their stupid idea of escaping. As the command flag fell, a dozen or so unglamorous parabolas set up a battle bridge in the faint light of dawn and began to erode the little courage of the nobles. The cannonballs, which were not intended to hit, landed near the noble fleet with ridiculously poor crosshairs, stirring up a huge column of water and creating a faint rainbow that surrounded the noble warships. From the nobles' point of view, this was already an overwhelming bombardment that was like a torrential rain. Then, something called probability theory, which was actually called metaphysics, came into play in the dark. In this era, the hit rate of long-range bombardment was extremely low. Unless it was within 100 meters, which was called close-range combat, the hit rate was mostly less than 1%. To be able to fire a cannon within a radius of 100 meters under the interference of a series of problems such as the strong wind, the trembling of the ship itself due to waves and other bombardment, and the maintenance of the barrel itself was already a godly gunner. To be able to hit a target with one shot was simply a legend. But one guy really did it. From afar, a curved cannon from the bow of a ship 800 meters away blasted directly into the armory of a noble's warship, causing a brilliant chain of explosions. When the warship exploded, the flames that soared into the sky, the wood shavings that were blown away and kept spinning in the air, as well as a large number of human limbs. Everything was like a horrifying oil painting from hell, deeply imprinted on the retinas of the nobles. In less than a minute, as many as 7 noble warships stopped their ships and raised their white flags high up. More blood-sail pirate ships, which had been designed for extreme speed, rushed into the nobles' fleet and immediately launched a close-range bombardment against the nobles' private sailors who attempted to resist. Bang bang bang. The well-trained blood-sail pirate ships fired continuously from bow to stern, teaching the nobles' private soldiers a good lesson on what a naval battle was. Of course, the nobles' private soldiers retaliated with cannons. It was a laughable salvo. Lester, who was watching the battle from afar, was stunned. He did not expect these private soldiers, who had only sailed merchant ships before, to be this retarded. The huge counterforce even pushed the entire ship 5 meters to the other side, as if it was moving horizontally. The cabin, which could not withstand the impact, even let out a typical cry of wood breaking. But all resistance was futile. The pirates bit their machetes and jumped over the cable that they had prepared. Everything was going smoothly, but when they killed their way into the enemy's cabin, there was a sudden change. A huge devil appeared. The clothes hanging on his chest even retained the noble's family emblem. Chapter 172. A kilometer above the sea west of Stormwind City, Lothar and his Griffin Knights followed Duque's Griffin and flew at high speed. Is the news true? When my Naga sent me the news, I informed you and His Majesty Lang immediately. We have to hurry or we'll have to collect the corpses of those guys. When he heard Duque say that the noble's fleet had been attacked, there was a moment when Lothar instinctively suspected that Duque was the one behind it. The reason was simple. As the upstart of Stormwind City, Duque had always been at odds with the traditional nobles. Even the Brando family, which had a direct conflict with Duque in the past, had never shown any signs of reconciliation on any formal occasions. Even if they wanted to stab you in the back 1,000 times and insert steel needles into each of your fingers, the nobles would still maintain their elegance and demeanor in front of others. If it weren't for the blood of Thoradin the Great and the friendship of Lang, Lothar might have long been killed in a dark corner of Stormwind City, and his corpse would have rotted away. Although Lothar trusted him, he could never see through Duque. At such a tense time, there was no need for Duque to lie to him and Lang. Instead, he fabricated an attack on the nobles to lure him away. Lothar had no choice but to save the nobles. After all, among all human kingdoms, the nobles were known as the cornerstones of the country. In fact, there was even a saying in the upper class of many kingdoms: the useless peasants can die, but as long as there are wise and brave nobles, the country can be revived even if it's destroyed. Lothar did not want to save them, but he had no choice. Anduin and Duque were the only cards that Lang could play. Duque, aren't your Nagas supposed to escort the fleet? Please, I only have more than 100 Nagas and a few thousand useless Murlocs. Please, this route is nearly 1,000 nautical miles long. How much territory do you expect to guard? But I've asked them to hurry. But looking at the schedule, we should arrive first. The attack on the nobles' fleet was indeed a blind spot for him and all of the upper echelons of Stormwind. Rather than saying that it was a blind spot, it was more accurate to say that the orcs' attacks were too powerful and attracted all of their attention. Just by imagining it, one would know that such a weak guard was loaded with the wealth of the noble families for thousands of years. It would be abnormal if it did not attract the attention of pirates, right? Noxus didn't say anything and followed Duke silently with over 30 Griffin Knights. Duque didn't take any detours. He went straight to the scene. That was an hour after the battle between the Bloodsail pirates and the nobles' fleet. The situation was so chaotic that Lothar didn't know what was going on. More than 20 Bloodsail pirate ships surrounded the battle in the middle, not daring to approach. In the battle, almost every 2 Bloodsail pirate ships sandwiched a Stormwind warship, initiating a white soldier battle. The ships on the periphery were like chicken ribs, tasteless and a pity to abandon. They didn't dare to open fire, nor did they dare to send pirates to help their own ships. Because every warship was in a melee. The protagonists of the melee were not the nobles' private soldiers, nor the Bloodsail pirates, nor were they Nagas or Murlocs. Instead, they were demons emitting blazing heat. Riding the griffin and circling half a circle in the sky, Lothar's face turned green. If the Bloodsail pirates had released the demons to attack the nobles of Stormwind, Lothar would have jumped down without a second thought. Obviously, it was the Bloodsail pirates who were being slaughtered. The blue-skinned, burly demon guards were incomparably dazzling under the sunlight. They brandished their huge axes and with their outstanding combat talent, they laughed wildly on the shaking ship, wantonly killing the Bloodsail pirates whose morale had already collapsed. The scene was like a butcher with a blood-stained knife chasing a fat pig that had nowhere to run. The pig's death was only a matter of time. So, the demons were released by the nobles? However, seeing many of the nobles' private soldiers and corpses lying on the deck, Lothar knew that things were not that simple. At this moment, Duque could not help but sneer in his heart. That's right. He was the one who orchestrated this whole situation. He spent a full 3 months asking Makarov to secretly collect the opinions of the nobles in Stormwind and verify them one by one. After obtaining a large amount of evidence of the nobles' crimes, he made a death list. Of course, Fame Brando and his family were at the top of his must-kill list. Below them were the allies of the Brando family. As a transmigrator, Duque was very clear about the nature of the nobles, and what these greedy fellows would do when their lives were threatened. Duque had waited for this day for a long time. After the dark portal opened, he had long ago contacted the Bloodsail pirates in the south of Stranglethorn Vale through secret means. As an ambitious butler of the nobles who wanted a piece of the pie, he told them how the nobles would transport away their 1,000-year-old wealth. Duque had also thought about what would happen if he implicated the Stormwind Navy. In that instant, Duque also hesitated. He did not want to kill a good person by mistake. But the heavens gave Duque another great opportunity. It was a group of nobles that Windsor had rescued from Karazhan. Baron Rafer Drugel, Count Crispin Ferens, Countess Dorothy Millsteep, Countess Catriona Warnindi. Duque was familiar with every one of these guys. Why? Because these guys were originally part of the Karazhan Dungeon of Warcraft. They were the secondary bosses under the second boss Butler Moros. From what Duque knew, these guys were already undead when he saw them. If Ralph Drugel could use the Paladin's sanction skill, he should be the father of Jules Drugel, the deputy mayor of Twilight Forest's Night Town. Duque knew about this as soon as he came out of Karazhan. He did not believe that these guys who were supposed to be one of the bosses could escape from Karazhan full of demons unscathed. Duque took the opportunity to get close to a few of them. Just like when Duque used the system elf to discover that there was something wrong with Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras. In his retina he saw the boss template of these guys with the word demon attached. Duque was laughing so hard that his belly almost burst. That's right, these demons were part of the insurance that Duque had set up. It could ensure that even if one day a great detective was so resourceful and found evidence of his collusion with the Bloodsail pirates, Lang would not blame him for this matter. The demons were led in by the nobles themselves. Who could be blamed for leading the wolf into the house? Perhaps it was because of this that Stormwind wanted to cover up this disaster of, most of the kingdom's nobles are demons. In the end, perhaps this was a murder that had once been treading on thin ice. If one part went wrong, the reputation that Duque had worked so hard to build would no longer exist. But after Duque carried out the perfect murder, to the end he could establish a perfect ending that was beneficial to the whole kingdom and even all of humanity. When the goal was achieved, the truth of this murder would never need to be exposed. Chapter 173. The demon was very powerful. It was so powerful that even the warriors recognized by the nobles couldn't shake it. Even a slap that couldn't even be considered a formal attack could smash a person's head into a rotten watermelon. A dog-like demon with 4 feet on the ground opened its huge mouth and swallowed the entire person, along with the armor and the weapon in his hand. The horrifying teeth that sounded like millstones grinding the body and metal, as well as the guards' dying wails, lingered in his ears. After seeing such a scene and hearing such a sound, just the thought of facing such a thing made their hands and feet tremble uncontrollably. It just so happened that such a thing was actually transformed by his dearest family member. The huge demon didn't just spread its massacre towards those damned Bloodsail pirates. It also extended its claws of death towards those who were originally on the same side. It didn't differentiate between friend and foe and killed as it pleased. This was simply a nightmare. This kind of nightmare seemed to be endless. Resistance was meaningless, and all who resisted had been crushed to dregs. There was also no point in running because the 2 ships were only so big and there was nowhere to run. Every survivor was a pitiful wretch waiting in despair for the final judgment to come. At this moment, a shining holy existence descended from the sky. Looking up blankly, he recognized that it was the radiance of arcane power unique to mages. A powerful mage. Who could it be? After almost forcibly conscripting all the private mages of the nobles, Stormwind still suffered a crushing defeat in the Battle of Magic. The Storm Kingdom's Wong clan's mage squad only existed in name. There were only a few high-ranked mages still active on the front lines. Obviously, it was the one that the nobles didn't want to see the most. Sea King Duke Marcus. The mortal enemy that the nobles would never reconcile with had become their greatest savior. This had to be said to be ironic. Of course, this was only for the nobles that were still alive. Not even 1% of the nobles that were still alive now. It was very simple. The demons from Karazhan could easily develop believers among these people whose hearts had been corrupted, and even directly turn them into demons. A pure soul was the most powerful line of defense. Even the leader of the Burning Legion, Sargeras, had to spend decades to completely corrode Medivh's soul. It was still an incomplete version because at the very end, old Mike still jumped out and gave CO Sam a big explosion. But when it came to nobles with pure hearts, Duque chuckled. Not every noble was qualified to be a paladin, and not every noble was named Bolvar for dragon. When the pirates arrived in front of the nobles, most of the nobles were desperately protected by their guards and gathered together. When the pirates' butcher knives saw the necks of these nobles that had actually become devils, the devils naturally jumped out and revealed their true bodies. In such a crowded situation, how many people could survive if the demon directly bloomed in the middle of the crowd? Anyway, when Duque landed on the ship, he did not see any nobles surviving. Oh, surviving in human form. Marcus, it was a roaring blast of air that was like a raging storm and a huge wave. Well, Duque couldn't hear it clearly, so he used his little finger to pick his ear. Did someone just call me? Bastard, you are. It's all your fault. Facing this more than 3-meter-tall mutated demon with a typical blue demon guard body and a nondescript human head, Duque was dismissive. Duque snorted coldly and suddenly a huge piece of ice rose under his feet, raising Duque's body like a high platform. In the blink of an eye, Duque was already standing on a 2-meter-high platform. This way he could look down on the demon. Sorry, you're too short, I didn't see. You're presumptuous, the demon suddenly pounced. You're the presumptuous one. Suddenly, a mysterious blue magic circle appeared in front of Duque, and a powerful, arcane impact turned into a huge fist, and the demon that was charging at him was pushed back even faster than when it came. Bang bang bang. The demon that crashed into the cabin knocked over a lot of things, but the demon quickly climbed out again. What's you, Sir Fame Brando? We haven't seen each other for more than half a year. How come you've grown uglier? Under the watchful eyes of dozens of survivors on the deck of the two ships, Duque mercilessly mocked the demonized Fame Brando. I'm going to peel off your skin and make it into a carpet. Fame roared and charged again. But this time he didn't charge recklessly. His 2 claws were glowing with a black light. Unfortunately, the gap was too big. Fame Brando, who had been driven out of the Storm Royal Magic Academy by Duque, had also missed the Dalajan recruitment last year. As a result, before becoming a demon, Sir Brando was still at the level of a magic apprentice. Demons were also divided into different levels. The more powerful an existence was, the more powerful it would be after it became a demon. How strong could a guy like Fom, who had wasted half a year, be? Putting aside the fact that Duque was already a sky mage, even if Duque was still an earth mage, he could still easily beat him up. 12 hands of magic appeared and shot out arcane missiles. For Fom it was like a storm. Puff puff puff, everyone was dumbfounded. In their eyes, that unparalleled terrifying demon was nothing but a punching bag in Duque's hands. Every arcane missile could easily blast a muscle on Brando's arm or thigh into pieces. The number of bullets that flew past Brando's body was the same number of holes or gaps that appeared on his body. Less than 10 seconds. Brando had become a human stick. Oh no, a demon stick. His limbs were all broken, and there were terrifying holes the size of a human's fist on his body. Every hole was spewing out bluish-purple demon blood. Even so, Brando was still alive. Rolling on the ground in pain, wriggling his wounded body like a worm, Fame Brando could not stop laughing. In the end you're just as dirty as me. What saint who saved the world? What hero who fought against the orcs? Aren't you just like me, filled with vengeance and hatred? I despise hypocrites like you the most. I know you won't let me go, so I'll wait for you in hell. Suddenly, a huge ice coffin wrapped around Brando, ending this demon's life. Looking at the burning warships in the distance, Duque muttered to himself, I just killed a demon, but this demon happened to be called Fame Brando. Chapter 174. Surprisingly, Duque didn't feel anything when he killed Fame Brando. If it was when he had just transmigrated, perhaps Duque would have been shocked, or he would have found it very satisfying. But now he only felt as if a symbol of the past had been erased, and he had just ended a part of the past. After the flying hand of magic killed the 4 demons that had been transformed from nobles in the lower cabin, everything quieted down. But the cold aura that lingered around Duque was obviously just the ice barrier that mages often used, but the coldness that seemed to be able to completely freeze people's souls clearly told every survivor who was in charge here. At this moment, Duque was God. A god who dominated the nearly 100 survivors on the 2 ships. Although the Bloodsail pirates who attacked the nobles' fleet were frightened, the nobles weren't much better. They had long known that Duque had a grudge against the Brando family, and this matter had become a topic of conversation among the nobles and servants during their leisure time. Now, if Duque was really unforgiving and said that the rest of the people had a demonic aura on them, and then he would kill them all, they wouldn't even have a place to cry. The people, trembling, quietly waited for the Master of Fate to speak. Hey, Bloodsail, all of you surrender or die. What a joke. Facing the demon just now, the Bloodsail pirates had already felt that sense of despair and helplessness. Now they were facing Pharaoh, who could easily deal with that demon. When Duque's cold voice came out, the Bloodsail pirates instead felt as if they had been granted amnesty, and they all threw down the weapons in their hands. Duque glanced at them coldly. Who's the leader here? Following the gaze of a pirate, Duque easily found a strong pirate covered in blood. The pirate in white with a red headscarf braced himself and stood up. Sir, what are your orders? Raise the white flag. After I finish dealing with the other pirates, you drive your ship away. If you want to escape, it doesn't matter, my merman will be here soon and... Duque gently raised his right hand. As usual, he used Calm Mind and Flame Blast to easily blast a small lifeboat that was trying to escape into the sky. Boom. It was a water column that was more than 10 meters tall. The berserk fireball not only blasted the entire sampan and the pirates on it into mincemeat, the scorching high temperature even caused large clouds of steam to ripple out, scorching the few pirates standing at the side of the ship more than 10 meters away. Silence. Silence. Deathly silence. Such an exaggerated instantaneous spell made these mortals forget to breathe. Oh, it wasn't forgetting. It was the kind of feeling that before Duque nodded she had lost the courage to even breathe. Duque smiled faintly. Trust me, the outcome of running away is definitely worse than this. That was just a demon, no? The current Duque was more like a demon in the eyes of the pirates. The group of pirates nodded like sifting rice. Duque didn't care about them anymore. With a whistle, the griffin that had been hovering in the air for a long time immediately landed on the deck. Looking at Duque facing the air current of the griffin's descent and getting ready to mount it, one of the noble's guards asked with a trembling voice, Sir, are you really not planning to do anything to the Brando family? Duque paused. No one should be born noble. Since they are born into a wealthy family, then they should act in accordance with their noble status. I am saddened by the fact that so many people in your family have been corrupted and turned into demons. But punishing you is His Majesty Rin's business. My duty is to save every citizen of Stormwind. Ignoring the remaining members of the Brando family, Duque rode the griffin into the air. On the other side, on another ship not far from the Brando family's ship, Lothar was pulling the king's sword out of the demon's neck. The splattered demon's blood stained the cabin door. He tilted his head and saw Duque riding the griffin from the Brando family's warship. He was deep in thought. That's right. Lothar didn't stop Duque from rushing over to the warship flying the Brando family's flag. To some extent, Lothar had already acquiesced to Duque's revenge. Understanding didn't mean understanding. Lothar was an upright person. If Duque started a massacre for personal revenge, Lothar might not say anything, but it would undoubtedly lower his evaluation of Duque in his heart. Seeing that there were still a large number of human figures on the two ships, Lothar secretly breathed a sigh of relief. At least Duque didn't start a massacre, so everything was within a reasonable range. As for what Duque did on the ship, everything would be clear when he returned. Duque immediately pounced on the second group of warships. After coming out of Karazhan, Duque always had a question. How strong was he? It was a very mysterious question. In terms of the quality of his mana, he was still within the range of sky mages. He could mobilize the elemental power within a considerable range. According to the results of his scan of Old Norton, he knew very well that his strength had long surpassed that of ordinary sky mages. In terms of the total amount of mana, Duque, who had inherited the arcane fire circuit from the High Elf Sun King and part of the inheritance from Medivh, had about 10 times more mana than a sky mage of the same level. That didn't mean that his strength was 10 times greater. With the help of the system elf, Duque, who could achieve multiple spells without any hindrance, could match the entire Storm King family's team of mages alone. In the process of mobilizing the elements in the surrounding atmosphere, he could cast more spells that were far beyond his strength. Hence, when he faced Count Christian Ferens, who should also be a boss, he really didn't feel any pressure. Solo. That was Duque's dream before he transmigrated. Now, it had been realized by Duque without any difficulty. In the face of a full-scale magic attack from the sky and the ground, Count Ferens, who had transformed into a huge doom guard with blood-red wings, was completely one-sided. An arcane impact that turned into a huge fist punched the Count into the air, and then there was a continuous and accurate magic bombardment. Even though the demonized Count was only 1 meter above the deck, the terrible magic attack didn't hit the deck at all. In just 3 seconds, the demonized Count Christian Ferens was killed. Duque cleared the demons on the noble's warship at a very terrifying speed and subdued the blood-sail pirates on it. When the Naga priestess Vara arrived half an hour later, everything was a foregone conclusion. Not only the blood-sail pirates who were entangled in hand-to-hand combat, but even the warship that was trying to escape could not escape Duque's pursuit. An hour and a half later, the blood-sail pirates that attacked the noble were completely annihilated, and the commander of the blood-sail pirates, Brigadier General Lester Zank, was killed by Duque. All the ships were taken back by Stormwind. Chapter 175. On this day in August, fear and uneasiness lingered on the entire retreating fleet. The news that the noble's warships had been attacked by the blood-sail pirates had been spread to the entire fleet through the Griffin Knights. Kurtiras, Commodore Cook, who was experienced in naval battles, had originally decided to let the entire fleet return. However, the messenger sent by Lothar insisted that Anduin and Duque could deal with the enemy's fleet, and that the Murlocs led by Naga had already rushed over. After some hesitation, Cook decided to maintain 3/4 of the sail, and deliberately split the fleet into two. The fleet of Kurtiras, which had a certain amount of combat power, would lead the way, while the transport ships at the back would still have a chance to escape if they saw that something was wrong. 3 hours later, a large number of blood-sail pirates appeared on the horizon. The strange scarlet almost made the lookouts subconsciously ring the alarm bells. In fact, a young lookout really did so. However, Kurtiras, who had foreseen the danger, arranged for double the number of lookouts, and another more experienced lookout stopped the young man. "Wait. Look at the flag on it." After seeing it clearly, all the lookouts were dumbfounded. "Captain, I suggest that you come and see this." Yes, it was indeed the warships of the blood-sail pirates. The navy of Kurtiras, who were of the same lineage, would recognize those ships even if they were reduced to ashes. In order to maintain the flexibility of the ship in all winds, it had a single horizontal sail and 3 triangular sails. The ship's sides were specially raised for boarding battles, and a removable wooden outer deck was installed for cannonade battles. Everything was clearly telling the navy of Cultivation that this was indeed an old adversary. However, the golden lion flag of Stormwind hanging on the main mast was telling the world that this was already the property of Stormwind. The eyes of the navy of Kurtiras were burning with passion. Before becoming the blood-sail pirates, the leader of the blood-sail pirates, Duke Fairville, had spent a lot of money to build the best warships in the whole of Kurtiras. In terms of quality alone, it was even above the main fleet of Admiral Dalen Proudmoore. The only difference was that the total number of ships that Duke Fairville had taken away was relatively small. There were only 12 large merchant ships and 24 warships. After modification and upgrading, these 36 ships were definitely the main force of the blood-sail pirates. Now that a total of 12 battleships had been taken away by the Stormwind, it would be strange if the people of Cultivation were not envious. If they didn't know that Stormwind Kingdom was about to fall, they would have suspected that Stormwind Kingdom was going to threaten their position as the overlord of the sea. Not only that, but the standard of the newly built small warships was also quite good. In addition to the ships that the nobles had taken away, what appeared in front of the people of Cultivation was a huge fleet composed of 70 warships of various sizes. If it weren't for the fact that they could see through the binoculars that the Naga and the Murlocs were escorting the blood-sail pirates to do their work, the people of Cultivation might have gone mad with jealousy. Brigadier General Cook put down his binoculars and muttered to himself, "Damn it, if we didn't have a stronger green skin to deal with, I would definitely suggest the General suppress Stormwind when I get back." On Poseidon, Van Cleef leaned against the porthole and stared at the strange fleet that was sailing in the opposite direction from the south of the fleet. The distance between the two sides was so close that he could even see the despair and dejection on the faces of the nobles' private soldiers. That was definitely not the expression of joy after surviving a disaster. If he had to use a word to describe them, it would be stray dogs. Excited blood pumped out of Van Cleef's heart and ignited his entire body. He felt his body and soul burning. The nobles are finished. Those arrogant nobles are finished. This voice was so clear and real that Van Cleef almost couldn't control himself. No matter how Duque did it, when the rotten flesh was cut off, even if Stormwind City fell, Stormwind would usher in a new life. Unknowingly, Edwin Van Cleef's heart was filled with the light of Duque. It was a fanaticism that made him offer everything of himself, including his loyalty, his life, his soul, and even his most beloved daughter, Vanessa. Late at night, Van Cleef couldn't calm down for a long time. Of course, he wasn't the only one who couldn't calm down. King Lang read the report 3 times, but after reading it he was still stunned for a full minute and couldn't speak. This report was too shocking. It wasn't just him, all the high-ranking nobles in Stormwind City were silent. Among the evacuated nobles, 1/10 of them were demons. When the Bloodsail pirates launched their attack, the demons who revealed their true forms caused the largest death of nobles since the founding of Stormwind. Of the 387 titled nobles, only 32 survived and all of them were injured. 7 families were forever exterminated, and the remaining 13 families were also sparsely populated. Half of the surviving nobles were minors. Most of them were seriously frightened. This wasn't a fabricated report by someone or some force. The testimony of more than 800 survivors was almost unanimous. These survivors included several extremely devout priests. It wasn't just them, the testimony of the Bloodsail pirates' prisoners was similar. Lang closed his eyes in pain. Do I have to tell the people that the lords they trust as leaders, the nobles of Stormwind who inherited Thoradin the Great, 1/10 of them are demons? Lang's voice wasn't loud, but it clearly spread to every corner of the meeting hall. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. If they did that, it would be a huge blow to their morale. At this time, Count Carton, who used to be an ally of the Brando family, raised his hand and asked to speak. Why can't we think on the bright side? At least we got twice the number of ships. We have enough fishermen to act as sailors. We can evacuate the people twice as fast. Lang shuddered and suddenly felt a little warmth in his chest. Yes, the people's losses would be reduced. But, Earl Cairton spoke again, the people who died were all local lords. I think we should respect their opinions before announcing the results to the public. After all, they are the cornerstone of the kingdom. The Count's words were like music to their ears. Most of the nobles had evacuated this time, but not every one of them could do so. For example, the nobles with important military positions in the kingdom. How could their own children become demons and kill their own people? How could they announce such a shameful thing? In fact, they had already thought of a reason, but they just didn't dare to say it. Now that Count Carton gave them a way out, they were so happy that they wanted to run up and kiss the Count on the spot. Oh, they really had to rely on their own people at the critical moment. Chapter 176. They did not know who was the instigator of this incident. Revenge and whatnot could wait. The most important thing right now was to disassociate themselves from this disgrace. As long as their reputation was restored, so what if they died? At most, it would just be a redistribution of benefits. If their reputation was preserved, even if this ship named Lang Rin sank, they would have an excuse to seek refuge with the other human kingdoms in the north. After a short discussion, Marquis Daminan braced himself and stepped forward. He bowed to Lang and said, "With your Majesty's permission, we hope to announce it as follows. In order to cover the retreat of the people, the noble army led by Duke Ferens fought against the Bloodsail pirates. When they gained the upper hand, the nobles who had been secretly turned into demons by the Bloodsail pirates suddenly counterattacked, causing the fleet to be routed. At this time, the brave and fearless Sir Lothar and Earl Marcus arrived on their griffins and cooperated with the remnants of the noble army to annihilate the Bloodsail pirates' sank fleet." Despicable. Shameless. At this moment, Lothar's lungs almost exploded with anger. It was clearly you bunch of nobles who despicably robbed the warships of the Stormwind Navy. In order to transport away the dirty wealth filled with the blood and sweat of the people, you unexpectedly suffered a double attack from the pirates and demons. Yet you still don't forget to flatter yourself at this time? If not for Lang holding him down, he would have already exploded after receiving the news of the warships being seized. Lothar's hair stood on end. In the next second he was about to draw his sword and behead this shameless man. But at this moment, Count Daminan was suddenly slapped away. Count Carton's slightly plump body spun twice in the air before falling heavily to the ground. Shameless. A thunderous roar shook the meeting hall. Not many nobles looked at the person who slapped Count Carton. He was the new generation of nobles, the most popular figure recently, Duke Marcus. This young duke had a more unyielding aura than Lothar. Duque abruptly waved his hand and pointed at Count Damanin, whose face was now swollen. While commoners risk their lives to dig moats for a ship ticket, you nobles throw a naval officer in a stormwind into the dock for a chest of gold. Lothar's eyebrows twitched. When 100,000 soldiers and civilians were prepared to risk their lives to bring up the rear, you guys didn't even care about how the warship would return just to take away a beautiful maid. You guys even blew away the last soldier on the warship. Lord Bolvar Fordragon's cheeks burned. It's obviously the filthy wealth of you nobles that attracted the pirates. It's obvious that it's your own corrupted souls that brought about the depravity of the pirates. You have the cheek to claim that you're the heroes who fought against the pirates. Claiming to be the descendant of Thoradin the Great? Bah. I don't want to be associated with you. With that, Duque spat on Marquis Damanin's face. It was obvious that Duque had insulted Marquis Damanin. Every noble present felt that the spit was on their faces. King Lang trembled from head to toe. At this moment, Len was frantically asking himself, am I wrong? Was I really wrong? Ever since he was young, the former king had always taught him that the nobles were the cornerstone of the kingdom, and that no one should touch the nobles. Lang had always regarded it as a sacred law. But as he grew older, he could not accept the actions of the nobles. Still, he always remembered the former king's blessing and did not act ruthlessly against the nobles. At this moment, this scene was constantly stimulating Lang's conscience and sense of justice. It made him tremble uncontrollably. However, as the hope of the kingdom, Duque had a direct conflict with the old nobles, which was not what he wanted to see. For a moment, Lang was a little confused. On the other side, the nobles were in an uproar. Duque was a hothead. Why did he have to be so stupid? Why did he have to act up at this time? Shouldn't the nobles have discussed all the conditions behind the scenes, and only when the negotiations failed would they have no choice but to stand on their respective sides and fight? Flipping out at the slightest disagreement? That's why they hated those ignorant peasants becoming nobles. The nobles were smart. Of course, they would not entangle with Duque over this matter that had already been sentenced to death. Apologize. Your actions are a despicable act that tarnishes the reputation of all nobles. Yes. Apologize. Immediately apologize to Marquis Damanin. Otherwise we will not recognize your noble status. The group of nobles clamored, clinging to the fact that Duque had violated the nobility's etiquette. Duque's cold snort caused the temperature of the entire hall to drop by more than 5 degrees. Nobility's etiquette, nobility's standards. Fine, I'll do things according to the nobility's etiquette. When Duque finished speaking, the nobles breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the hothead Duque had finally given in. Who knew that in the next second, Duque would throw a white glove at the Marquis face. Well, for the sake of etiquette, nobles would always wear white gloves. And throwing a white glove at the other party's face meant only one thing: a duel. When the conflict between two nobles was so big that it could no longer be resolved, they could settle it with a duel with a suitable notary. Those who refused to duel would be seen as the greatest shame of the nobles, and would never be accepted by other nobles for the rest of their lives. Duel. Didn't you think that I insulted you just now? Then duel with me to wash away the shame. Duque's cold and arrogant eyes stared at Marquis Damanin. That pair of indifferent eyes made the Marquis hair stand on end. The next moment, Duque pulled out his sword. Duque didn't have a sword of his own. It was a flame sword that he made out of fire elemental essence and copied the standard longsword of Stormwind City out of thin air. The fire elemental essence that was supposed to be extremely hot and violent was actually as tame as a puppy in Duque's hand. If it wasn't for the blazing aura that could be clearly felt from a dozen meters away, no one would think that it was a real flame. No, I didn't think you insulted me. Marquis Damanin actually shrank back. Well, after killing so many people, one would naturally have a murderous aura. Duque made his debut killing gnolls, murlocs, nagas and orcs. Recently he had even roasted thousands of orcs into charcoal. His murderous aura was definitely at the level of overflowing dominance. On top of that, he had killed Sargeras. According to the legends, he had killed 7 people in the tribal camp. Even if Duke was known to be a swordsman, which nobleman would be stupid enough to fight him? You don't dare? You have no balls. Duque spat out his poisonous tongue mercilessly. Just when everyone thought that was the end, more than 36 white gloves suddenly flew through the air and landed on the oily and disgusting faces of the nobles who had been heckling just now. Chapter 177. It was a white glove that was as thin as a cicada's wing made of ice. Although it was made of ice elements, it was indeed in the shape of a white glove. Then what did Duque mean? Whoever is not convinced can come and fight me. Who else? The nobles were silent, not daring to make a sound. Duque roared, "That's right. I am insulting you. I look down on you. If the nobles are indifferent, selfish, greedy for life, afraid of death, disregard the law, corrupt and arrogant, then the nobles. I don't want to be an earl anymore." As soon as these words came out, the whole room was silent. Don't want to be an earl anymore? If it was during peacetime, the nobles would have immediately roared. What do you think the face of Stormwind is? But now Duque was indispensable. Almost all the sailors and fishermen were Duque's people. Duque, who had snatched back the warship, had his reputation in the navy soar. There was also the Naga and the Murlocs, whose strength was unknown. Countless people now only remembered Sea King Duque, who had saved everyone's lives, Duque who had risked his life to kill the orc camp and burn hundreds of thousands of orcs, and Duque who had risked his life to kill the Devil King for the survival of mankind. But unconsciously they had forgotten the failed King Lang, who had lost his territory. It was no exaggeration to say that Duque had become a symbol of hope in the hearts of the people, whether they wanted to admit it or not. Now Duque was saying that he should not be an earl? With Duque's strength, with Duque's fame, with Duque's wealth, which human country would he not be a guest of honor? Without Duque, the entire line of defense of Stormwind City might collapse in 3 days, and then hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians would be wiped out by the orcs. To some extent, it should be Stormwind that had fallen into poverty that could not contain a great god like Duque. Yes. Now it was Duque who was forcing her to abdicate. Lang stood up abruptly and looked at Duque in disbelief. He had never thought that things would develop to this point. Duque had completely stood on the opposite side of the aristocratic class that he was defending. Unfortunately, he couldn't even say the word, no. Duque abruptly turned around, his eyes shining as he stared at King Lang. Yes. I'm forcing her to abdicate. But I'm not asking for more power. I'm just forcing your majesty to wake up. Proudly stepping forward, Duque puffed out his chest and sucked in his stomach. I've never been born noble. People are only noble because of their noble behavior. Thoradin the Great, the founder of the Arathar Empire, was the same. 1,000 years ago, the king who led the abandoned people to this valley and founded Stormwind was the same. Why was it noble? Why did the late king set the iron rule that no one can be conferred a title without military merit? The entire meeting hall fell into silence. Only the sound of the wind passing through the windows and sweeping through the hall could be heard. Not only the kings, dukes, and other high-ranking people, but even the royal guards at the side seemed to be lost in thought. They stroked the lion carvings on the edge of their swords, their eyes filled with a thoughtful look. Duque's voice continued. Why? Isn't it for today? For today, when mankind is in danger of extinction, to be able to have a true hero and leader worthy of his position, to lead the people out of their predicament and out of despair? In the hall, the eyes of the nobles shrank and dimmed. But the eyes of Lang, Andoin, Bolvar, and the group of guards lit up. Stormwind City is destined to fall, but one day in the future, when Stormwind City is to be recovered, when this great kingdom is to be revived, please answer me, the great and wise King Rin. At this point, Duque suddenly raised his head and looked straight at Lang with his sharp eyes. Are you counting on these so-called nobles who abandoned their people and fled with their wealth to serve you? Or are you counting on those who are truly willing to fight to the end for the future of mankind? Tell me, King Lang Rin, and everyone present who has opened their eyes. Tell me, who do you choose? Duque's voice that shook the heart was filled with a firm and sonorous feeling. Every brick, every piece of wall decoration, every inch of ceiling in the hall echoed with Duque's question. In just a moment, every truly courageous person in the hall unsheathed their sword and raised it high in the air. I choose Duke Marcus. Windsor, who had once saved the king's life, was the first to step out. This was the choice of the loyal minister of the kingdom. Duke Marcus, The upright and plain-spoken Duke for Dragon stepped out and raised his sword high. This was the choice of the important minister of the kingdom. Beside him, there were nearly 10 superior nobles who were famous for their integrity who raised their swords. The Lion of Azeroth, the king's childhood friend, and the most loyal and courageous Sir Lothar also raised his sword high and made his most important choice. Father, I choose Duque. The only heir of the kingdom, the future king and the future legend of the generation Varian Rin, made a choice that placed the future of the entire kingdom on the line. Reginald Windsor, Bolvar for Dragon Anduin Lothar. Each and every one of these heroes who were familiar to the later generations, used their actions to show their attitude. Even Prince Varian Rin, who was supposed to evacuate in the third batch of ships and was still in the council hall, raised his short sword and shouted with them. Duque, the voice was like the howling of the wind, like thunder from the ninth heaven that could penetrate one's soul, and it crashed into Lang's heart. Lang felt that he was in an incomparably silent world. There was nothing in the world, only his own heart was shouting strongly. The voice that was becoming clearer and more precise came from himself, from his ancestors, and from the heroes who had sacrificed their lives for the survival and reproduction of mankind. Countless voices converged into a unique force, pushing him to make a choice at the crossroads of fate. Scorching hot blood rumbled as it flowed out from his heart, spreading to his 4 limbs, to his 5 viscera and 6 bowels, to every corner of his body, agitated and surging. Standing at the crossroads, his eyes seemed to see the future for a moment. To the left, he seemed to see the Stormwind who trusted the corrupt nobles, completely destroyed in the flames. To the right, he seemed to see the destroyed Stormwind city being reborn from the flames with the help of Duque Anduin and other loyal and capable ministers. Yes, he might not be able to see the end of this heroic epic. The new era must belong to the next generation. Yet he was able to compose the most splendid beginning to this great human epic. For a moment, Clayan was so shocked that he could not control himself. He pulled out the king's sword and raised it above his head. His gaze seemed to penetrate the fog of fate. Lang made up his mind. Chapter 178. The loyal and brave generals of Stormwind raised the swords in their hands. They could feel the passion in the eyes of their most beloved king. Unknowingly, their breathing and their hearts had synchronized with the king's. It was an inexplicable throbbing of their hearts. One by one they entered a mysterious state of trance. It was as if they had traveled through time and space to see thousands of years ago, when their ancestors set up the first stone tablet in this strange and lush valley, declaring this place to be called Stormwind City. They seemed to see their ancestors cutting through thorns and thorns, seeing colorful insects fleeing from the grass under their feet, and seeing this land become a paradise for humans. They also seemed to see King Lang, who had inherited the will of their ancestors, about to make a great decision that would change the fate of the entire kingdom. The usually noisy assembly hall was filled with a sacred air that was both familiar and strange at the same time. It was as if they were having a mass in the Storm Cathedral, listening to the Archbishop's sermon and feeling the gaze of the statues on the 2 sides. The eyes of these great pioneers crossed thousands of years and quietly watched Lang. Quiet and holy. The loyal and brave generals chose to listen, and the despicable nobles gave up on defending. The meeting hall fell into absolute silence. It was as if the whole world had quieted down just for that holy answer. Lang's eyes were wide open, and his blue pupils were filled with a sense of sublime clarity. The golden lion flag with a blue base and golden edges, which had been passed down in Stormwind for thousands of years, emitted a brilliant light behind him. His voice was clear and magnetic, full of penetrating power, and had an irresistible majesty. I, King Lang Rin of Stormwind, hereby declare that 20 noble families, led by Duke Farron's family, have abused their power, degenerated and colluded with demons. They have disgraced the name of the nobility and are a disgrace to the nobility. The names of all 20 noble families are hereby abolished, and all remaining noble children are demoted to commoners. The property they have obtained through improper means will be distributed to the meritorious soldiers in this battle as an example. I declare that anyone, regardless of origin, age, race, or gender, as long as they have made great contributions to Stormwind, will be conferred the title of nobility. Similarly, anyone who dares to betray the interests of humans will be punished by Stormwind, no matter how far away they are. Meritorious service will be rewarded and crimes will be punished. Anyone who goes against this oath, no matter their background, no matter their status, they will all be killed. It was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. Everyone's face was filled with intense shock. Lang's spirit and boldness could reach such a level. No king would dare to wipe out half of the nobles in the country in one go, but Lang dared. No monarch dared to link the supreme position with merits, but Lang dared. No ruler would have the guts to use talents so freely, but only Lang dared. Even though Duque's actions behind the scenes had caused shocking losses to the nobles and placed it in front of Lang as a fait accompli, even though Duque had used the great crisis of the country's destruction to blackmail Lang, in the end, it was still Lang who made the decision. Lang had made the wisest decision. No, it was even wiser than Duque had expected. It was already the realm of a great man. Based on these 3 points, as long as Lang's Stormwind did not really destroy the country, and as long as Lang's bloodline and policies could continue, Lang was bound to leave a thick stroke in the history of humans in Azeroth. Everyone present felt that their souls had received some kind of mysterious sublimation at this moment. If the resistance against the invasion of the tribes was a glorious hymn, an epic that originally did not belong to a single person, then at this moment, there was only one protagonist. Lang Rin. For humans, for Azeroth, Lang shouted. For humans, for Azeroth, Duque, Anduin and the others echoed in unison. The feeling of excitement lingered for a long time. Everyone's chest rose and fell violently. They looked at each other and saw the same smile in each other's eyes. Lang glanced coldly at the nobles who had tried to force him to abdicate. Gentlemen, you may leave now. It's time to discuss confidential military affairs. It has nothing to do with you. Lothar and Duke Fordragon stepped forward at the same time. Beside them, more than 10 royal guards formed a fan shape. The nobles' mouths twitched, and there was an unconcealable cowardice in their eyes. In the end, they did not protest anymore and quietly left. This scene was painted into a famous painting by a later artist based on the eyewitness account. It was auctioned off for a sky-high price of 3 million gold coins. The title of the painting was The End of the Decaying Era. After the nobles left, the huge meeting hall seemed empty. Lang and the others immediately moved to a smaller, more private meeting room. Including the guards, there were no more than 20 people in the meeting room. But these people would become the core of Stormwind's power. If Stormwind could survive, Bolvar was firmly on Duque's side just now. But now he was the first to speak up. Oh, my wise Archmage Marcus. Although I would like to thank you for helping the kingdom get more than 50 ships, I can't take it anymore. When you and Lothar went to save the situation, the kingdom lost nearly 3,000 elite soldiers. This is the total number of those who died and could no longer go to the battlefield. Everyone's expression was ugly. The kingdom could not afford to train a qualified soldier for too long. Even if the speed of transporting soldiers and civilians could be nearly doubled, the current situation was that the line of defense would likely collapse before that. Lang walked over and put one hand on Duque's shoulder. He looked calmly into Duque's eyes. I will not regard what you just did as an attempt to force me to abdicate. Stormwind has been sick for a long time. You just gave me the determination to cut off this rotten flesh. But the kingdom's new life still depends on the efforts of the younger generation. I think that since you gave me so many perfect answers before, you won't disappoint me this time, right? If Duque could so perfectly force the aristocrats to leave, but was unable to come up with anything useful in the following military conference, and was cheated by Stormwind, that would be a real joke. But Duque was Duque. A miraculous person who would never disappoint his supporters. Duque smiled lightly. Of course you won't be disappointed, Your Majesty. First, please allow me to introduce you to an important guest. Please, my follower Aitana and the guest she has brought. Lang nodded with an indifferent smile. The door of the meeting room opened. Not long after, a freckled female wizard wearing the wizard robe of the Stormwind royal family's wizard group entered with a guest. The guest made the expressions of many of Stormwind's upper echelons stiffen. Because the so-called guest turned out to be a goblin. Chapter 179. Itana, who hadn't seen her for a long time, now looked a little more capable and experienced than Duque. Even though Itana was a person who had seen the world, she still felt a little uneasy when she suddenly saw so many big shots of the kingdom. After a few deep breaths, she quickly adjusted her emotions. Your Majesty, Your Excellencies, I am the follower of Earl Duke Marcus Itana. Please allow me to introduce you to Mr. Sherlock Belfort, a goblin engineering merchant from Stranglethorn Valley. Greetings, Your Majesty. Greetings, Your Excellencies. Goblin Sherlock gave a very standard aristocratic salute. Although his movements were very standard, none of the kingdom's higher-ups present knew how to face this goblin. The infamous goblin. Unlike the goblins in the novels that Duque had read before he traveled to this world, the goblins were generally dirty, despicable, low IQ, and amazingly fertile. They harmed humans all year round. Although the goblins in the world of Azeroth were also humanoid creatures, they had green skin that was no different from orcs, were only slightly taller than a human's knee, had thin, matchstick-like limbs, and had a pointed head and large eyes. How to put it, some of their inferior qualities were 100% inherited, such as harming humans. But overall, the goblins in Azeroth loved money more, were good at all kinds of technological inventions, and were better at running businesses. The goblins had set up many companies, which were similar to the structure of real companies before Duque traveled to this world. However, these so-called companies were also more vampire-like, such as the notorious Venture Capital Corporation. There was a joke that reflected the reputation of the Venture Capital Corporation. Very well. Venture Capital Corporation, please join our company. We have investments in every corner of Azeroth. Someone asked, what's the price? Venture Capital Corporation, we're being hunted by the whole world. Someone was speechless. The actions of the goblins were absolutely abhorrent. Many night elf druids would kill every goblin they saw, and if they saw two they would kill a pair. Seeing the appearance of the goblin merchant, Noxus pointed at his head at Duque without hesitation. What he meant was, are you crazy? They were actually working with gnomes. Duque smiled and ignored Lothar. He slightly changed the classic sentence from Das Kapital. Hey Sherlock, I heard that if there is a 20% profit the goblins will be restless. If there is a 50% profit the goblins will dare to take risks. If there is a 100% profit the goblins will dare to take the risk of being hanged. If there is a 300% profit the goblins will dare to trample all the laws of the world. Is it true? Sherlock screamed on the spot. Slander. This was definitely slander. We goblins are of noble character. If I give you 5 million Arathar gold coins to bring me the head of the tribal chief, Black Hand. Sherlock's small eyes. Perhaps it was an illusion, but they seemed to have widened 10 times in an instant. Sherlock's sharp voice instantly became incomparably sonorous and powerful, resolute and courageous. I promise to complete the mission. At the same time, Sherlock had already rushed over recklessly and extended his right hand towards Duke, rubbing his index and middle fingers continuously. But in the next second he felt that Duque was joking. Your Excellency Sea King, are you playing with me? No, I am just proving to His Majesty the Storm King that you have supreme courage in the face of money. Be it Lang, Anduin or Bolvar, they all looked as if they were having a hard time holding back their laughter. You. Sherlock still wanted to flip out. Duque's words were like a bucket of cold water poured over Sherlock's head. Don't think that I don't know the strength of your so-called suicide squad. It might be possible for you to kill a tribe chief of 10. Great chief. If I really gave you the deposit, you would only send a group of cannon fodder to their deaths, and then run away with the highest deposit you could negotiate. Sherlock Belfort's face instantly turned pale. He lowered his head and stammered, we goblins are all trustworthy and pay attention to business ethics. How could we do such a thing? As he spoke, under Duque's piercing gaze, Sherlock became more and more guilty. His pair of feet also moved towards the door unintentionally. Unexpectedly, a pair of magician's hands suddenly appeared behind Sherlock and lifted the short goblin in front of Duque. I have no interest in the integrity of the goblins. The only thing I am interested in is the engineering craftsman in your venture capital company. What do you want? Has Itana already told you? His life was in the hands of this terrifying mage. Sherlock nodded his head like an aggrieved little wife. All right, I want to add another condition. If everything explodes before it is thrown out, for every person on our side that is injured, I will take the life of one of your relatives, cut off one of your fingers and deduct 100 boxes of money. Sherlock was indifferent to the previous conditions, but when Duque said 100 boxes of money for each damaged item, Sherlock suddenly made a sound like a pig being slaughtered. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws. No goblin will accept such conditions. Don't even think about it. Duque sneered. What if I increase the price by 10% and double the quantity? 30% higher. Sherlock immediately calmed down and bargained. Nonsense, don't think I don't know what you are using. Heavy rock could be made into high explosive, iron ingot and silk, and it would be done. With such low cost you still dare to charge me 30% more? Sherlock was dumbfounded. Then, like a general who had defeated a general, he finally nodded. All right, 10% is 10%. Just like that, Sherlock retreated with a long face. Itana was very nervous and hurriedly apologized. I didn't know, so those things will explode before they are thrown out. Duque rubbed his eyebrows and thought to himself, damn, gnome projects are unreliable, goblin projects always explode. If I didn't know this, then I would have played the game for nothing. You are not in this field. It's not your fault. After comforting Itana, Duque finally turned to Lang and explained, didn't you say that you have tens of thousands of militia but don't know how to use them? Weren't you guys worried about how to evacuate the last of the defenders? I will solve all of these problems for you all at once. Not only that, I will also throw in a big gift package. What gift package? Lang was stunned. Duque smiled mysteriously. Now that I say it, it no longer feels mysterious. Chapter 180. For 2 days in a row, the east and north walls of Stormwind City were filled with battle cries. However, the people of Stormwind City would never have thought that such a terrifying battle was just a test by the Horde. Yes, it was just a test. During the absence of Duque and Andoin, Bolvar was in charge of the defense. Although he knew that the Horde was only sending 1,000 men to test the waters, Bolvar had no choice but to fight with all his might. The difference in individual combat power was too obvious. There were moats, barbicans, city walls, arrow towers, and towering hills equipped with catapults. Such a three-dimensional defense system only erased the disadvantage that the humans had when fighting against the orcs in terms of individual combat. The battle was still very difficult. The 5-meter-tall city wall was still too short for the tall and strong orcs, who were unreasonably strong in terms of athleticism. Orgrim gave Blackhand a stupid idea, but it was also the most effective one, and Bolvar was at a loss of what to do. Fill the river when you see it, build a slope when you see it. The laborers, who were dwarves in the eyes of the Horde's warriors but were burly men in the eyes of the humans, carried a large number of rocks and braved the deadly rain of javelins to throw the rocks into the moat before turning around and leaving. The process repeated. In just a day, the urgently dug moat was filled by nearly a third. Duke Bolvar could not imagine how tragic the situation would be when the humans were forced to fight the green-skinned monsters in the streets after losing their geographical advantage. However, the greatest consolation was that Duque had returned. His strength alone was no less than half of the Wong family's team of mages. Are you really not going to do anything? Lothar asked Duque on top of an arrow tower. Duque shook his head. No, I'm not going to do anything. It's more beneficial for us. Why? Because our main opponent is the chief's deputy, Orgrim, and not the chief himself. Lothar recalled what Garona had said about the tribe's chiefs and well-known figures. He remembered that Orgrim's specialty was that he was wiser than the other orcs. He's a powerful orc warrior with the wisdom of a shaman's. Duque explained, if I had saved the situation from the start, Orgrim would have been able to identify the weak points in the defensive line faster. In fact, my final defensive position is not here. I still have to rely on you guys here. Lothar played with an iron lump with a wooden handle as long as a palm. Are you sure we can survive 10 days with this? Duque said with absolute certainty, I'm sure. But I believe you. The rumbling of tribal war drums could be heard from every corner of the city wall near the mountain range. Old Dem was a porter. Apart from his strength, he was practically useless. He, who was over 50 years old, joined the militia purely because he could get a ticket for his daughter and grandson to leave early by signing up for the militia. Lying on the battlements, old Dem held onto a helmet that had been dented in when he descended. It was obviously taken from a dead man's head as he trembled and looked out. Beside him was his old neighbor Kana, a baker. Kana kept asking in a low voice, "Have we arrived? Have we arrived?" Old Dem looked at the countless green figures surging towards the moat and felt his hair stand on end. Wait, not yet. Old Dem's heart trembled as he looked at the green giants with their terrifying faces and long fangs. At this moment the kingdom's soldier in charge of supervising them suddenly shouted, "Militia, get ready to throw that thing. Before I give the order, no one is allowed to open the lid below." Old Dem and Kana immediately tensed up. Calm down. Calm down. Wait for those damned greenskins to attack." Looking at the signal flag on the command tower behind the city wall, all the kingdom's soldiers shouted in unison the moment the red flag dropped. "Now." Old Dem followed the steps he had taught them and hurriedly opened the lid below the wooden handle. Instantly, the sound of fireworks being ignited could be heard from the other end of the wooden handle. Most of the people were illiterate and did not know that it was a fuse. "Throw it with all your might." The commanding officer's roar caused many people to slip up and directly throw these strange wooden sticks with metal pimples into the moat below. There were even some idiots who accidentally dropped the sticks onto the battlements. It was the soldiers in charge of supervising who were quick to react. They swung their arms around and threw the thing across the moat. A few seconds later, when the terrifying green dwarfs carried the boulders and ran to the moat, the green dwarfs suddenly stopped. Boom, boom, boom. A series of continuous explosions stunned both the humans and the orcs. This moment was worthy of commemoration. Because this was the first time in the history of Azeroth that a firearm had appeared. Even though it was an unreliable product of the goblins, the metal grenade was a killing weapon that would forever be recorded in the history books. What dodging? What resisting? In the face of such firearms that transcended the era, the struggles of the orc laborers seemed to be meaningless. The orc laborers could only watch as their comrades were annihilated. Boom, boom, boom. The continuous explosions were accompanied by the flying pieces of metal due to the explosion of the high explosives. This caused a terrible second injury to the laborers, who were only wearing thin clothes and even had their upper bodies bare. Even 10 meters away from the explosion range, some of the laborers had their throats slit by the flying shrapnel and died. The first batch of metal grenades not only took the lives of all the orc laborers by the riverbank in an instant, some of the grenades that fell into the water also exploded into the sky. In the face of such a terrifying and incomprehensible scene, the orc laborers began to waver. They abandoned their duties and forgot that there was a supervising team not far behind them. They threw down the rocks that should have fallen into the moat and turned to run. However, most of them did not run far before they were killed by the orc supervising team as if they were chopping vegetables. "What is that?" Orgrim cried out in shock. "Let the second wave go." Great Chieftain Blackhand did not care. The second wave of laborers screamed and cried as they were forced to go forward by the orc soldiers with machetes and axes. However, the green formation once again collapsed after another batch of strange lumps of wood was suddenly thrown down from the city wall. The laborers broke down even earlier than their comrades who had died earlier. Almost as soon as the explosion sounded, the last batch of them started to run back. To escape the death that the supervising team brought upon them, they even waved the huge rocks in their hands in an attempt to resist. Of course, they were all cut down in pools of blood without exception. "What the hell is that?" Orgrim roared. Chapter 181. Through the telescope, Anduin and Bolvar watched the bloody battlefield and the orc laborers who were groaning in pain as they walked towards death. Anduin and Bolvar were tongue-tied. "Damn it, these goblins make me feel like I've wasted my years of martial arts training." Anduin smacked his lips, seemingly thirsty from unease. "Duque, how many did you order? I want more of these iron skin grenades." Bolvar was even more direct, demanding an exorbitant price right from the start. Duque smiled without saying a word as he handed over a price list. It listed the price of the iron skin grenades, as well as the skyrocketing price that would require the goblins to work overtime to produce them. More importantly, Duque had specially noted that the already terrible rate of misfires and premature explosions would skyrocket due to the rushed production. That's right, in this era where there was no mechanized mass production, where everything was done by hand, how high could the success rate be? As long as one was human, they would make mistakes and get tired, and there would be differences in the accuracy of each product. And the goblins' lax way of doing things meant that all the products created by these damned and whimsical fellows were extremely dangerous. Balver's conscience did not allow him to let his soldiers and militia take such a huge risk. If they did not kill the enemy and instead blew themselves up first, they would have no place to cry. Andoin was magnanimous. We should comfort ourselves like this. Yo, a box of grenades is enough to arm a militia regiment. Duque smiled. A militia regiment needs to undergo a long period of training, but this thing only needs half a day of training. That was not wrong. Ordinary infantry training required a long period of combat training to have a little bit of success. Even so, the survival rate of new recruits on the battlefield was so low that it gave any commander a headache. Not to mention the humans who were already at a disadvantage in terms of physique. The strength, speed, and agility of the human recruits were probably similar to the orcs' cannon fodder laborers. There was a considerable gap between them and the official orc warriors. Moreover, the opponents were not ordinary orc soldiers. After fighting for so long, any human commander with a brain would know that they were the elites of the Blackrock clan, a powerful orc clan. Although that was what he said, he still had a toothache. Bolvar sucked in a breath of cold air. I feel like you're throwing away His Majesty's gold coins. Duque shrugged. War is about money. Andoin pursed his lips. I've realized for a long time that your way of thinking is completely different from ours. I sometimes wonder if you're from Azeroth. Duque was non-committal. What should Duque say? Say I'm a transmigrator? That would really be laughable. The archers, who had long been determined to be useless against the orcs, were once again used to deal with the orcs. Archers also had a fatal weakness. Once it was nighttime, the power of an archer would be greatly reduced even if they used area shooting. The appearance of the iron skin grenade greatly enriched the strategies and tactics of the human side. After all, an archer needed to aim properly and a grenade would explode everywhere. As time passed, the orcs also discovered the drawbacks of the iron skin grenades. These metal lumps that made loud noises were a great threat to the orc laborers. However, to the real orc warriors, especially those who wore more armor, it was not a fatal injury. It was difficult for the shrapnel from the explosion to penetrate the muscles of the tall orc warriors. As long as the vital parts were not hit, most of them would only suffer superficial wounds. Under Orgrim's suggestion, the great chief Blackhand agreed to better arm the orc warriors who were attacking the city walls. Hence, in the next few days, Lothar saw a large number of orc warriors using cowhide, metal pieces, and even the armor of the dead human warriors to make a temporary armor. With the orcs' protection, the iron skin grenades, which were originally relatively lethal, were reduced by half. They became less lethal weapons. Lothar asked Duque, "Do those damned green-skinned dwarves have anything more powerful?" Duque silently handed over the price of the high-explosive bomb, which required a large amount of thorium to make and was recommended by the profiteer Sherlock. Lothar was stunned for a full 10 seconds before he finally said, "The weather is really good today." Yes, it was noon with high temperatures and a thunderstorm. Thanks to the thunderstorm, all the bowstrings almost lost their elasticity due to the humidity. It was a tug-of-war. However, the scales of victory still tipped towards the orcs. When Orgrim had the orc laborers wear thick leather armor or thick clothes, he restarted the plan to fill up the river. Lothar knew that something was wrong. On the 7th day after Duque dealt with the Bloodsail pirates, the moat on the east and north sides of Stormwind City was filled up. The orcs even used orc laborers to pile up stones at many places to build a slope that led to the Barbican in front of the city walls. The Barbican had almost become a pit. Orgrim seemed to be addicted to piling up stones, and he still had a large number of orc laborers rush over. Throw the stones into the human's pit. If you can't make it back, then throw yourself in as well. That was Orgrim's order to these weak orc laborers. The direct result was that the number of orc laborers dying increased exponentially. At first, the humans tried to clean up some orc work or dig up some slopes every night. However, Stormwind City was severely lacking in heavy machinery. Not only were the gnome excavators expensive to rent, but Sherlock was also unwilling to let his subordinates drive the expensive robots into the city that was bound to fall. Unless, Sherlock rubbed his thumb, index finger and middle finger together again. That gesture of asking for money. You know what it means. Duque was held up. Just as he expected, the Horde quickly discovered Stormwind City's weakness. It was the place to the north of Stormwind City near Stormwind Port. It was different from the steep cliffs of the valley in the south. The mountain roads to the north of Stormwind City were dangerous for the humans, but for the orcs who were good at climbing mountains, it was not a true dead end. In the first 2 times the orcs successfully sent a few scouts down, causing a commotion among the citizens of Stormwind City. After that, King Lang decisively let Duque, who was the strongest fighter in Stormwind City, guard the mountain peak. This prevented the orcs from attacking from that direction. The sea, on the other hand, was the domain of Kurdalas and Duke. Even though they could transport more than 10,000 people per day, the situation was still going downhill. After the citizens of Stormwind City held on for more than 20 days, the biggest problem for Lang and the citizens to cover the retreat had arrived. Excluding the evacuees and those who died in battle, there were still 10,000 people left. Lothar estimated that none of the 50,000 people would be able to escape. The orcs were already in a frenzy. They would not allow the humans to evacuate at a rate of 10,000 a day. Stormwind Port, which was their lifeline, did not have a fulcrum like Stormwind Fortress. What should they do? Chapter 182. Over at the Horde, Orgrim was troubled as well. This was because there was a very important fulcrum in his plan that he couldn't break through. The fulcrum was Garona, the female beastman that Orgrim had caught by accident, but she had a tough backbone that exceeded Orgrim's expectations. Perhaps it had something to do with Garona growing up as a slave. She had an unimaginable tolerance for pain. The straightforward beastmen weren't good at interrogations. All of their interrogation methods were based on simple violence. If Orgrim wanted to get the location of the Shadow Council from Garona, he couldn't really kill her. However, not only was Garona incredibly tough, there seemed to be a mysterious power in her body. Once Garona's life force dropped to a certain level, it would wrap around her. Even if Orgrim used Hammer of Destruction, he wouldn't be able to break it. When this mysterious orc's life force and stamina recovered to a certain level, Garona would become a captive once again. This situation was driving Orgrim crazy. He was indeed eager to overthrow the great chief Blackhand to avenge his good friend Durotan. Unfortunately, he couldn't capture the Shadow Council or Ghoul, Dan. Even if he defeated the great chief, he would still be treating the symptoms and not the root of the problem. Once the Shadow Council, hiding in the dark like a poisonous snake, made Orgrim's scalp go numb just thinking about the mysterious power of the curse. The only good news was that the humans couldn't hold on much longer. Every day there would be more than one wave of orc assault teams breaking through the moat. Some even crossed the Barbican and rushed up to the city walls. If it wasn't for the elite emergency forces that the humans had formed to suppress the orcs' attacks with a large number of long-range attacks, the city walls might have already been breached. Orgrim was still conflicted. Stormwind was the first large foreign kingdom they encountered after crossing the portal. Conquering its capital was definitely a great honor. If this honor was accomplished by the current Great Chief Blackhand, then even if Orgrim succeeded in the challenge, most of the orcs in the Horde would still remember the former Great Chief's good deeds. Even if he achieved even more glorious victories in the future, the simple-minded orcs would still think that he stole Blackhand's achievements and continued to follow Blackhand's path of victory. Just thinking about it made him feel like he was suffocating. As the great chieftain of the future generation, Orgrim's greatest strength aside from his insane combat ability was his intellect. He was one of the rare great chieftains among the orcs who had foresight and were so cold that they were almost utilitarian. When he didn't have absolute control over everything, he would choose to be patient. However, on the 25th day of the siege, Orgrim sensed that the humans' combat power had reached a critical point. You said that there are no more than 100,000 humans in Stormwind City? Orgrim had a complicated reaction to the scout's report. Yes, when the situation is calm, humans can evacuate about 10,000 people a day. However, there have been a few days of strong winds and heavy rain recently, and the retreat of the humans has almost come to a halt, the scout leader reported. Orgrim felt his heart ache. If the humans didn't have so many tricks up their sleeves and only relied on the low city wall, the tribe would be able to breach the city in 2 or 3 days. At that time, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians were captured. Not less than 100,000. The tribe wouldn't have to sacrifice more than 20,000 warriors and 70,000 orc laborers during this period of time. Thinking about this, Orgrim felt his heart ache. At the beginning, the humans didn't have any power to fight back, but now they were able to attack and defend, causing the tribe's losses to increase. Even if the simple-minded people in the tribe still thought that the humans were useless, Orgrim knew that if they let too many of them escape, the tribe would have to pay twice the price to wipe them out in the future. He couldn't wait any longer. No matter what price he had to pay, he had to destroy the enemy's rearguard here. If he couldn't truly destroy the humans' combat power, this battle-hardened army would become the tribe's biggest problem in the future. Thinking about this, Orgrim no longer hesitated. He wanted to advise the great chieftain to launch an all-out attack tonight. At the same time in Stormwind Keep, the few people who held the fate of the Stormwind Kingdom gathered together. Duque said softly, "The Horde's all-out attack will be tonight." Lang suddenly looked up. "Are you sure?" "I purposely let the Horde scouts pass through my defensive line to observe Stormwind Port." Duque's casual words gave people a strong feeling that everything was under Duque's control. Noxus took a deep breath. Indeed, the last 50,000 is the minimum number of troops needed to defend Stormwind City. Bolvar suddenly looked up at Duque, then at Lang. "Your Majesty, I strongly suggest that you leave with the last batch of ships tonight. You are the King of Stormwind." "Enough. Bolvar." King Lang suddenly stopped the loyal Bolvar. "Since Duque said that he had the confidence to send us away at the last moment, what else do we have to hesitate about? I can't accept running away like a coward, abandoning my people who trusted me. If you want to ensure that Stormwind has a king, Varian has already been sent to South Shore." These words were already very harsh, almost cutting to the heart. Bolvar had almost risked his life to speak, but his words were undoubtedly a vote of no confidence in Duque, who had been so slow in coming up with the final plan. "My apologies, Duque. Bolvar is just..." Lang scolded Bolvar and immediately turned to apologize to Duque. "No, this is my problem. I should not have used His Majesty as a part of the plan." "No, Duque, you did nothing wrong. You have already explained to me the risks that I will face. At worst, I, the King of Bereavement, will die for my country. No, it should be said that if this plan does not succeed, I would rather die for my country. I do not have the face to beg those fellows for charity like a stray dog." Lang suddenly raised his head, looking straight at Bolvar and the other most loyal subjects. Everyone could see the will to die in Lang's eyes. Wise and great, these had always been Lang's labels. But very few people had thought that Lang would rather die than submit and would be so unyielding. Perhaps many people would think that losing to the powerful orcs was not such a shameful thing, but they neglected the feelings of a king who was determined to achieve great things, but had to give up his own capital and the 1,000-year foundation of his ancestors. Duque also sighed. In history, because Lang was assassinated, Stormwind City fell, and Lothar was forced to go into exile with the little Prince Varian. Now, history had changed slightly, but the strength of the orcs had not changed. If not for Duque, perhaps Lang would still have died here. "Alright, as long as you all listen to me, I can guarantee that even if Stormwind City falls, we will still be able to bite off a piece of meat from those green-skinned monsters." Chapter 183. For those who had never experienced a war, any description of a war would be feeble and hollow. Once, Duque naively thought that he could save everybody, but Lothar modified Duque's plan slightly. It was a magic image that was almost a video. There were no signs of life on the scorched land. Thick pillars of smoke that reached the sky were everywhere. The once prosperous fields had been abandoned, and the end of the horizon was full of dilapidated houses. The streets were littered with corpses. There were strong farmers, skinny old men, pregnant women with big bellies, and children less than 10 years old. Most of them had been decapitated, and their blood had already begun to dry up and turn black, proving how miserable and tragic the scene was at that time. Duque seemed to have heard the screams, howls, and cries that lingered in the village at that moment. Regardless of age, gender, or ability to fight, everybody had obviously been dragged to the square in the village for a unified massacre. It was a genocide to exterminate the entire human race. A game would always be a game. No matter from which angle it was described, it was not enough to describe the unforgettable impact on the soul. Lothar walked over and patted Duque's shoulder. Your plan is great, but you're still too young. Duque's mouth was half open and half closed as if he wanted to argue, but in the end the words became, "At least let me go with you to see off the soldiers." Briefly stunned, Lothar stared into Duque's eyes and said only one word, "Okay." The sun had already set, and the moon was hazy in the sky, as if it were morning for Stormwind City that had stood for 1,000 years but was about to fall. A large number of troops gathered in the open space outside of Stormwind Fortress. 10,000 soldiers stood solemnly in the shadow of Stormwind Fortress in a silent, enormous square formation. On the continuous city walls between the districts of Stormwind City, torches had already been lit. The torches on every battlement on top of the city wall cast long swaying fiery red light on the square formation, emitting the clanging light of armor. It was the gathering of iron and blood. It was the reflection of hatred and fury. It was a volcano of fury that was about to erupt. The daring team had been assembled and silently waited for the order to attack. If one looked closely, they would notice that most of the members of the suicide squad were injured. Or light or heavy. Some of the more serious ones even had their arms broken. Some of the more serious ones even had their intestines sticking out of their bodies, and they were merely holding them in their hands. The continuous battles had drained the spiritual power of all the priests in the city. They had used up all their medical supplies 10 days ago. If these people were left alone with the backward medical standards of this era, most of them would die. But even if he died, he had to die with value. Suddenly, a clear command sounded. His Majesty Rin has arrived. Salute. With a series of clattering sounds, 10,000 people stood at attention at the same time. Their injuries had obviously affected them. Under normal conditions, the elite soldiers under Lothar's guidance would definitely be in sync and orderly, as if they were a single person. Duque, who was following behind Lang, Andoin and Bolvar, suddenly felt a lump in his throat. Lang, in his golden armor, stood at the entrance of Storm's stronghold. His facial muscles twitched. Anduin Lothar stood beside the king. His loud voice, which was like the roar of a lion, spread throughout the entire army. Warriors of the kingdom. His Majesty Rin has come personally to send you off, warriors. Silence. Nearly 10,000 people once again stood at attention and put their feet together. Walking down the slope, Lang, Duque and the others slowly walked past the front of the formation. What kind of faces were they? There was no vigor, no vitality. Every face was filled with the paleness of walking towards death. However, every pair of eyes exuded an amazing desire to fight that was as blazing as fire, mixed with a murderous aura of hatred and anger. Every pair of eyes was shining with the will to fight to the death. Yes. Every warrior knew that they were going to die. It was just that before burning their lives, they wanted to give the invaders a fatal blow in the most severe way possible. Duque felt a lump in his throat. Lang looked around at the familiar and unfamiliar faces, and could not help but be moved. He patted the shoulders of every soldier in the first row and walked over. In the end, he still managed to control himself well and walked to the high platform that had been set up beforehand. Lang raised the big bowl filled with wine high, and the soldiers followed suit and raised the big wrists filled with wine. King Lang's clear voice spread in all directions. Azeroth has been invaded and humans are being slaughtered wantonly like pigs and dogs. But we are very lucky. Everyone, please join me and raise the long swords in your hands against these damned green-skinned creatures. Be it me or you, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, we will all die in this damned war. But it doesn't matter because we are dying for our children and grandchildren. I only hate that I, Lang Rin, can't accompany you to fight shoulder to shoulder tonight. But it doesn't matter, please leave first. When I see you again, I will either proudly tell you that I have taken back Stormwind City, or I will tell you that I died on the way to the charge just like everyone else. Now with this wine, I wish you all to chop off more orc heads. With that, Lang raised his head resolutely and drank the whole bowl of strong wine in one gulp. Looking at Lang's Adam's apple moving, Duque, Andoin, Bolvar, and the others raised their heads and drank in unison. It had to be said that this kind of golden wine originating from the dwarves had a strange, fiery feeling. The fiery turbulence rushed into his throat and flowed down his esophagus into his stomach. Duque suddenly felt a burning sensation all over his body. Duque, who did not like to drink, staggered, but he took a step back. Duque immediately steadied himself. Sir Marcus, I heard that you were the one who suggested this battle, so I would like to ask one last question. A veteran with his head wrapped in bandages and an empty left arm stepped out of the ranks. He raised the large plate of wine high and saluted Duque. There was a low buzz of discussion among the soldiers. Duque took a step forward, his mouth still spewing the strong smell of wine, but his mind was very clear. You ask, I will answer. The veteran grinned. It was a mouth with teeth stained with dirt. I am a rough man. I do not understand magic, nor do I understand any plans. I only know that my wife and children have died in this battle, so I have nothing to worry about. I just want to ask you, tonight, how many orc lives can my death be exchanged for? This was not only the voice of the veteran, but also the voice of the 10,000 warriors who were about to die. They were not afraid of death. The key was whether it was worth it. Duke's body trembled and he roared, 1 for 10. And I will use the head of the orc chief to lay the foundation for the heroic souls of our brothers. The veteran laughed proudly. Haha. I originally thought that killing 1 would be enough and killing 2 would be a profit. I did not expect that I could go to hell while looking at the head of the tribe's chief. Ah. Even if I die, I am willing. He resolutely drank the wine in the large bowl in his hand, and with a crisp crack he smashed the large plate into pieces. Behind him 10,000 soldiers sat in the same position, and the sound of plates smashing could be heard. With tears in his eyes, Lang raised his hand. Set off. Chapter 184. The soldiers' heroic spirit soared to the sky, and they roared thunderously in a deep voice, Your Majesty, we will make a move first. Cleon raised his sword. The cold light of the sword reflected off Cleon's handsome but no longer young face under the bright light of the fire. At this moment Duke, who was standing beside Cleon, was affected by the tragic atmosphere. Unbeknownst to him, his tears had already begun to fall. An hour later the Horde's war drums sounded as if they had agreed. The boorish roars of the Horde's warriors came from the east and north of the mountain range again. Dozens of goblins' special flares shot into the air and chased away the darkness. The Horde's attacking troops could be seen clearly. Not only were the smooth mountain paths filled with muscular Blackrock warriors, but there were also countless thick ropes hanging down from the steep mountain walls, and the burly figures of the orcs could be seen clearly. It was a real green tide. The sound of crossbows kept coming from the city wall. But the orcs continued to crazily rush towards the city wall despite the barrage of crossbow cannons and falling rocks. An orc's helmet and head were smashed into pieces by a rock, and his burly body fell down. He quickly became a stepping stone for the next orc, and he continued to rush up the city wall along the slope of rocks. An orc's chest was pierced by a javelin, but he still endured the feeling of his life slipping away and threw his battle axe at a human warrior on the city wall. Fierce battles were taking place in every corner of the entire eastern and northern city walls. The final battle had begun. The orcs were attacking Stormwind City, a golden lion that was riddled with scars. But even though it was weak, even though it was no match for the orcs, this lion still opened its sharp claws and gave the invaders the fiercest revenge. Not far away, Orgrim held his famous Hammer of Destruction, and stood there in a daze. He saw the humans launch a brave and desperate counterattack against the orcs on the top of the city wall. Then they were once again drowned by the orcs' green tide. Orgrim squinted his eyes and he felt a bad omen. It was said that humans had 7 kingdoms, and those dwarves who were only as tall as their knees also had a kingdom. It was also said that there were also some thin and weak elves. If every kingdom resisted as fiercely as this Stormwind, how many of the warriors of the tribes would be able to return alive after repeated battles before conquering the world? Weak humans are nothing but prey with a little brain. They are no match for the warriors of the tribe. Not far from Orgrim, the great chief Black pointed at the city walls that had fallen into the hands of the Horde and laughed loudly. Orgrim felt that something was wrong. Compared to the human elites he had fought a few days ago, these humans were clearly already injured before they charged at him, even though they seemed to be in a frenzied state of morale. Orgrim even ran to one of the watchtowers and was shocked to find that many of the dead soldiers had broken legs. Jumping off the arrow tower, Orgrim found Black Hand. Great Chieftain, something's not right. The human elites aren't here. Black Hand raised his hardened black hand and pointed in all directions. There were roars and roars everywhere, and the sounds of fighting could be heard everywhere. Obviously, the weak humans are still putting up a resistance. Even if Orgrim didn't want to admit it, it was true. The sounds of fighting could not lie. At this time, an outpost rushed back to report. Reporting to Great Chief, the human defenders are retreating to the west port. But every block of the human city has walls and moats, and the resistance is very fierce. Ha! Stupid humans. Black Hand clutched his stomach and laughed. Orgrim saw from the light of the fire that the humans had turned almost every big house in the city into a stronghold. They had built barricades and ditches at every street entrance, forming small camps. Looking at the fierce resistance, it seemed like they were going to fight the horde in the streets. Fighting in the streets? Seeing this, Orgrim couldn't help but sneer. In the past, the Draenei had the help of the Shining Light, Holy Light, and excellent weapons, but the Draenei still couldn't defend Shotrath City. In urban warfare, where individual strength was the most important, Orgrim didn't think that any race could win against the warriors of the Horde. Black Hand laughed maniacally. If the human cities had more defenses like the outer city walls, and they used all their forces to defend the city walls, then the Horde might have to pay more sacrifices. But these weak humans are stupid. They actually want to fight in the streets, ha ha ha. This time it wasn't just Orgrim, all the chieftains around Black Hand laughed along with him. Ha! No warrior is a match for the strongest warrior, the beastmen. In urban warfare, the javelins and cannons are useless. The humans are dead. Black Hand waved his huge hand. Attack through the night, we can't let a single human escape. You can take the other spoils of war, but leave the head of the opposing chief to me. Yes. The chiefs of the small and medium-sized tribes were overjoyed. They listened to the order and dispersed, returning to their own tribes to command their troops. Orgrim, lead your people to the port as soon as possible. I don't want to let another human escape. Understood. It would be a lie if the beastmen weren't tired after days of attacking the city. But the high feeling of conquering the enemy's city made every single beastman feel invigorated. There was no more discipline, no more cooperation. Chapter 185. Woo woo woo. The melodious sound of the horn seemed to come from beyond the heavens or from ancient times. It was desolate and heroic. It reminded people of the world filled with yellow sand, the days when they had to fight against the most ferocious beasts in extremely harsh environments in exchange for a chance of survival for their tribesmen. It was either kill or be killed. The weak had no right to live and the strong ruled over everything. This was a primitive sound, and it evoked memories hidden in the hearts of countless orcs. How many years had it been since they last heard this sound? Makra. All orcs knew that when a warrior challenged a chief to replace his position, he would use the most sacred duel ritual, Makra. One-on-one. The winner would get everything. Not many people knew that this Makra, which was used to resolve conflicts between orcs and decide who the chief would belong to, could also be used against hostile races. Of course, there was a prerequisite. Chief Black Hand of the Horde. On behalf of our king, King Lang Rin of Stormwind City, who is also the chief in your eyes, I challenge you to Makra. Do you dare to accept the challenge? Duque's voice echoed in the night sky of Stormwind City. No one knew if it was magic or something else, but this shout in orc language was clearly heard by the 100,000 orcs attacking Stormwind City. Great Chieftain Black Hand and Orgrim were walking on the streets of the old Stormwind sector with their bodyguards. Suddenly their bodies trembled. Makra? Humans actually knew Makra? Almost instantly Orgrim spat in his heart. It was that lowly traitor Garona who taught him again. Duque's voice continued. Our human king is different from your chief. Our king is not the strongest warrior. That's not important. Our king and our strongest warrior are here. As long as you defeat our strongest warrior Anduin Lothar in Makra, our king's head will be yours with both hands. We will wait for you at the place where the light pillar is. Black Hand's huge rock-like palm was resting on a thick stone pillar by the side of the road. Almost subconsciously exerting force, the entire stone pillar was easily crushed by the huge strength of his grip. The hard stones exploded like hardened flour, scattering all over the ground. All the orcs' gazes were focused on Black Hand's face. Great Chieftain. Orgrim probed. The muscles on Great Chieftain Black Hand's ugly face kept twitching, and thick veins popped up on his face like a dragon's beard. His eyes were bloodshot due to extreme excitement. Black Hand could feel the fire in his body being pumped out from his heart, spreading to every corner of his body, reaching every cell in his body. Ha ha ha. Black Hand laughed maniacally. Beastmen never fear challenges. I don't care what Rai what An do. Their heads are mine, all mine. Orgrim immediately understood and shouted to the side, relay the order of the Great Chieftain. The Great Chieftain has decided to accept the humans, Makra, and forbid any attacks on the humans near the light pillars. The messengers scattered in all directions and soon the rough roars of the messengers could be heard everywhere. The Great Chieftain has accepted the Makra. Forbid any attacks on the humans near the light pillars. Let's go. The clouds dispersed and the moonlight shone on the ground. Together with the light from the torches, the two huge dragon-shaped shoulder ornaments on the Great Chieftain's shoulders were ghastly pale. On the other side, in the church area of Stormwind City, on the steps of the Stormwind City Cathedral, Ryan sat on a red velvet throne with golden edges on the 9 steps. Anduin and Bolvar stood beside Ryan, one on the left and the other on the right in their military attire. Will the Great Chieftain of the Beastmen really come? Bolvar asked Duque for the 3rd time. Enough. Bolvar. Duque's analysis will not be wrong. The Beastman Chieftain, who is most obsessed with personal merit, will not let go of such an opportunity. Lang gently stopped his loyal minister. Anduin, who was leaning on his sword, looked even more relaxed. Don't worry, Stormport is not far behind us. The soldiers are all behind us. If the tens of thousands of soldiers are unable to protect our king's safe escape, then we will all commit suicide. Of course, the Beastmen could not find the main force of the humans, because the last 40,000 soldiers and civilians had already gathered quietly near Stormport. There were tens of thousands of people, but they did not make a sound like a giant beast lurking in the night. Not every soldier knew the arrangements of the higher-ups. They were only informed that there would be special means to arrange for their evacuation. As for what special means, no one knew. Many people stared at the large pile of hay at the port in a daze. The last ship had left in the afternoon. The soldiers scratched their heads and could not figure out how to evacuate. Fortunately, since they had been ordered to bring up the rear, the soldiers were mentally prepared to fight to the death. However, the open space from the church area to the port was really not conducive for humans. Moreover, the soldiers did not have any heavy weapons on hand. If they fought with the Beastmen here, it would be a one-sided massacre. The commander of the Griffin Legion, Tom Simois, who had met Duke once before, still did his best to place the shield-wielding heavy infantry and spearmen against the sea, setting up a formation in the direction of Stormwind City. If the Beastmen rush here, we can at least hold on for a while, General Seamus muttered to himself. When he heard that the plan was proposed by Duque, Seamus did not know why, but he kept thinking of the legendary master of Duque who fought against the Beastmen at the Red Ridge Mountains. That kind of spirit of 1 against 10,000, of taking the head of the enemy's general amidst thousands of men and horses, still deeply shocked his heart. Woo-woo, a long horn sounded in the east of Storm City. Lang, Anduin and Bolvar all looked up at Duque at the same time. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Duque's mouth. Chief Blackhand has accepted your challenge. Lothar. A smile also appeared on Lothar's enchanting face. He and Lang looked at each other. Lang nodded heavily. Go, Anduin. My life and the future of Stormwind are in your hands. Lothar bowed deeply and then turned to Duque. Sometimes I really admire you. You have mastered the orc language and their customs in such a short time. I have learned from Jay, that assassin, for so long, but I only know a few words in the orc language. Duque smiled mischievously. I found a large number of orc books in Karazhan. I have read a lot, I will not lie to you. There were no books about orcs in Karazhan at all. Duque was completely lying. Lothar did not know. Alright, I will rely on you for the translation later. Chapter 186. The once peaceful and tranquil Stormwind City had now become hell. Deer antlers were everywhere and trenches were everywhere. Almost every sturdy building in the city had been transformed into a bunker with sandbags, gravel, and wood. The soldiers who acted as suicide squads used all sorts of methods to attack the invaders. The javelin throwers hid behind a window on the 3rd floor, continuously shooting at the attacking beastmen. In the beastmen army advancing along the main road, there were beastmen who were shot and fell to the ground. But the beastman soldiers did not care and only continued to attack fiercely. Whether it was the human barricades or the bunkers that had been transformed from mansions, the various beastman clans fought to launch wave after wave of attacks. The green tide flooded one position after another. First was the capital of the Dreenii Shotrath city, then the human Stormwind city. Which city would it be next? The beastman soldiers did not think too much about it. The sense of pride and glory from conquering the enemy's capital had long made the beastmen lose their minds. Most of Stormwind City had already fallen into the flames of war, but the human positions were layered like a woman's dress. Every time they tore apart a position they would see the next one. They did not even have time to plant the clan's flag. A human position that was responsible for providing cover would definitely throw a rain of javelins. That kind of mutual cover, like an endless line of fortifications, gave the attacking beastman commanders a headache. The bloodletting of the tribes was unknowingly expanding. Just as the battles in every area were extremely fierce, a huge and silent army came straight to the Stormwind City Church District. Over here, with the huge and beautiful Stormwind City Cathedral behind them, nearly 1,000 royal guards stood with swords in hand, waiting in formation. Over there, the great chief beastman guards, who were more burly than normal beastmen with an average height of nearly 3 meters, came forward with great chief Blackhand and Orgrim. These elite beastman guards wore thick black leather armor that covered almost their entire bodies. They wore ferocious shoulder guards that towered into the sky with sharp-boned spikes. On their heads were full iron-horned helmets that were meticulously made by the best beastman laborers. In one hand they carried a huge battle axe that they had collected from the humans. In the eyes of these humans, the huge battle axe that required 2 hands to lift was just a one-handed axe in the hands of the elite beastman guards. Lang narrowed his eyes. The green crowd parted to the left and right like a tidal wave. Great Chief Blackhand, who was over 3.5 meters tall, walked forward with Orgrim, who was holding the hammer of destruction. Shallow people who don't know how vast the world of Azeroth is. Stormwind City is just a kingdom in the south of the Human Alliance. Even if you take down Stormwind City, it will only be equivalent to you destroying a clan. Duque did not back down. The orcs were showing signs of going crazy. Of course, Lothar was not to be outdone. He raised his sword and all the royal guards put down their shields. The sharp swords were erected in the gap between the shields, like poisonous snakes that were about to spring out. All of a sudden, both sides were at daggers drawn. Blackhand's huge black arm that was petrified blocked in front of Orgrim. Forget it. Humans. I acknowledge that your king has the qualifications to send someone to challenge me, but the beastmen only accept challenges from the bravest warriors of other races. Blackhand's voice fell and he didn't even need to give a meaningful glance. An incomparably tall and sturdy personal guard of Blackhand suddenly took 3 steps forward with an axe in hand. If that Anduin is really the best human warrior, let him prove himself. Orgrim shouted. Duque turned his head. Hey Anduin, Blackhand only accepts challenges from the best human warriors. You have to kill that guy first. Lothar tilted his head. Just one sentence. Duke retorted. Could it be that Blackhand despises us, saying that Storm Kingdom is just a small kingdom, and we have to translate every sentence? Lang laughed. Anduin, don't be so sensitive. Our chief court mage will know what to do. Alright, once we get rid of this guy, their great chieftain will fight with me, right? Yes. That you're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.